we go to Mist Falls? Did we go to Mist Falls at Yosemite? Does that go up to?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's the appointed hour of 7 o'clock. Thank you all for being here for work session. I'd like to call the meeting to order and call on Jake, I think, first to lead us through the fiscal year 20 fourth quarter financial report.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, council members. Tonight, I have the fourth quarter financial report available for you, and I'm very pleased to be able to report some positive news as we close out our FY 2020 fiscal year. If we get into the first page of the report there, thank you much. Overall, looking at our budget, revenues exceeded budget by 1% total. Now, just looking at this amount in the general fund may be a little misleading due to receiving CARES Act funding, as well as State Street revenues that were carried over from the previous fiscal year. So eliminating these revenues reflects that 92% of the budget has been met. COVID-19 overall appears to have its greatest impact on meals and lodging taxes. These revenues were very strong in the beginning of FY 20, but really started to taper off in the fourth quarter. But I think a very strong FY 20 up to that point really helped us out in the end. Interest earnings were also significantly impacted overall from the COVID-19 pandemic. But the revenue losses in all, when it's all said and done, were not quite as severe as we anticipated. So very strong close to FY20 in revenues. Our use of money and property, again, interest earnings were significantly impacted. We did have some increased revenues, such as charges for services, permits and licenses, et cetera. All in all, very small portion of our revenue, total revenues. A few areas I wanted to point out in the revenue part of the report. There were no significant budget concerns in miscellaneous revenues. Revenue sharing with the county and contributions were in line with expectations. We did have a significant contribution made to the fire reserve account towards the end of FY20, which did account for some of that overage. Recovered costs also came in under budget. This is due, however, to the final fire and rescue settlement with the county. The reason being, we did give them credit on the settlement for certain fire and rescue payroll expenses that we covered with CARES dollars. So we excluded those from the total amount calculated and due to the county, which results in this category being lower than anticipated, but having made up that difference from CARES money as reimbursable payroll costs. And again, our federal categorical revenues were significantly inflated due to CARES funding. So that reflects that significant overage in that category. Also, in state categorical revenue, it is important to point out, I think, that a large percentage of the shortfall in this category was due to less reimbursement for public assistance. We, year to date, have had considerably less services being paid for by the city. So that does account for some of that drop off in the category. Moving on to general fund expenses. And this is where the really positive news comes in. Expenses were only 88% of budget. Every function of government category came in with significant savings. The only with a slight overage was leisure services, and this was due to a slightly higher contribution from the city due to the RARO settlement. This is something I've noticed the last 2 years, that participation is budgeted heavier on the county side and lower on the city side. When we get the actual numbers, the city has higher participation than anticipated. So this is something we'll work in future budget years to kind of get more accurate to real participation levels. Other than that, every category came in with significant savings. So we're very pleased to be able to report that expenses were well under budget in the general fund. And I'll go ahead and take a pause there if there are any questions specifically related to the general fund revenues or expenses.
Thank you, Jake. Any council members have questions? Comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
if I may, I'd like to give a shout out to all the department heads who, as Jake mentioned, did a great job at the end of the fiscal year controlling expenses when we were in that uncertain period of not knowing what would happen with COVID. And that's why we ended the fiscal year so strong. And those folks deserve a lot of credit for that. They all did a fantastic job.
Absolutely. Concur 110%, as I'm sure all of council does. Thank you. There are no questions from council. Proceed, Jake.
Okay, moving on into Fund 2, the school fund. If we can scroll into the revenues. School fund revenues were overall about on target, slightly less for use of money and property attributed to Providence preschool rent payments. They only had 7 months of rent due to early closure from COVID-19, an overall very small amount. Actual state revenues such as state sales tax, lottery funding, and the technology grant were under budget, but an overall higher ADM for the year helped to offset many of those specific state revenues, which were reduced. So that was good news in the end. Federal categorical revenues were under budget, about 8%. And just to point out, in case there would be any questions about this, the CARES Act funding that the school directly has applied for, the $51,000, has not yet been received, and that will be reflected in FY 2021. Likewise, the city's allocation of CARES funding to the schools out of the first phase of CARES funding will also not be reflected until FY21. So in case there were any questions on why those revenues were not showing up. Just quickly to summarize expenses, overall expenses were about 2% under budget. Most significantly, technology was 21% under budget. The new technology position there at the school began several months into FY20, so there were some savings there, as well as there was overall some significant savings on technology procurement throughout the year and finding some good prices better than anticipated. So overall, no significant budget concerns with the school fund, and they did come in 2% under budget overall. I'll pause for any other questions at this point.
Any questions from council? Jake, real quick, can you speak to the capital projects that didn't occur?
Yes, and speaking with Tommy Roberts, Assistant Finance Director, who works primarily with the schools, there was one capital project that was completed pertaining to the Waddell Playground and the stairs and sidewalk. The other project, I believe, has to do with a new entrance and exit to the music room at Waddell that was not completed in FY20, and that reflects the under budget amount that you're seeing for capital projects.
Thank you, sir.
All right, moving along into the utility fund, Fund 5. This amount, first off, reflects an accrual of the July billings back to FY20. We do this every year because the vast majority of those water and sewer revenues were incurred in FY20 before July 1. So each year that billing from July is accrued back to FY20. Water and sewer revenues are at 89% of budget. The good news, they were up 3.2% from last year, but lower than we anticipated in the budget for FY20. This really has to do with the last quarter of FY20 having a significant drop off in these revenues with no students in town, reduced tourism and other visitors to the city. So the last few months of FY20 did cause some disruptions in water and sewer revenues, but overall a slight increase from last year. Moving into utility fund expenses, the biggest item to note here is that, again, like last year, water and wastewater fees paid to the MSA did exceed budget. And specifically with water operations, at our third quarter financial report, my predecessor, Gary Swank, did mention that a significant water leak was found on post at VMI. That situation has been remedied and accounted for approximately 55 million gallons of water that the city was paying for. So we estimate that this will have an impact of savings over $200,000 moving forward. So this should be a significant savings in water operations. Wastewater was 16% over budget, which on one side is 22,000 less than last year's total treatment fees. However, again, did exceed budget. This largely attributed to I&I issues in the sewer system, which I think we're all very well aware of and are working to address. All other expenses in the utility fund do remain under budget for the fiscal year, though. And I'll pause yet again. Actually, before I do pause for questions, just briefly on the equipment replacement fund, Fund 6, really no items of concern other than expenses were under budget. There is a carryover requested for a sewer jet slated to be purchased in FY20. The equipment was not received prior to June 30th, so we will be requesting a carryover of this amount to cover this expense in FY21.
Council, you all out there? Just making sure. Jake, obviously you're doing a great job and grateful for the explanations.
Sure, thank you very much. If there are no further questions on the financial report, I would like to move over to the list of requested carryover amounts. Now, during the work session, we're not requesting any action. This is only for discussion purposes. This will be presented again in the regular meeting for action of approval, but for this portion of the meeting, only for discussion. The amounts you see here for FY20 carryovers for each of the funds broken down. The really good news coming out of the general fund, if you may recall, we had budgeted for $282,000 in appropriated fund balance to balance our budget. I'm pleased to report that our actual budget surplus is $812,555. So that creates an additional $555,000 that we would like to carry forward into FY20 and reserve from fund balance for exploration of ways that we can build these funds back into the FY21 budget at some point. The remainder of these in the general fund are simply yearly carryovers such as the fire reserve account and other grant funding for the fire and police department, as well as some other operational lines for the fire department that projects that we need to complete in FY20 and amounts that we would like to carry over. I'd also like to point out in the school fund, the bottom line you see there of $878,000, that is not an operational surplus. The operational surplus came in at $51,045. These remaining amounts are year-to-year carryovers that are reserved from uncommitted fund balance. So these amounts are annually carried over and have built up over the years for textbooks, future capital needs, high school needs, and represent portions of fund balance that are reserved for these purposes. So didn't want there to be any confusion that the schools were $800,000 under operating budget. And the remainder of these items are carryovers for either equipment purchase or for unfinished capital projects in both the utility fund and capital projects fund. So with that, I'll see if there's any questions or further discussion on the carryovers.
Members of council have any questions?
Just one, although Jake, I'm not sure that you can answer it. I'm kind of curious what a sewer jet is and how many we have and how long they last. I'm just a little curious about that.
From my understanding, the sewer jet is a piece of equipment that is mounted on a Ford truck chassis and is portable and used to carry around to clean out the sewer system. So it's a mobile sewer cleaning piece of equipment. I'm not aware that if we have any others, but this is one that I believe that we were replacing.
It's like a power washer for your sewer.
Yeah, I think, for example,
less.
line from the manhole in my front yard, from the line that runs to my place, gets a lot of grease buildup over time, and they stick that jet in there and flush it out.
There's one that they use pretty often across the street from me onto the Morningside properties. It's up on the hill across the street from me. They come at least once every couple of months. I don't know what's wrong with that line, but they do have to come and do that regularly.
Jake, looking back at the school fund, I'm working from memory here, so it may be foggy, but it seems that we had a policy of, I want to say 10% of any surplus would be set aside for capital. Am I remembering correctly? And is that reflected in that 51,000?
No, that is not reflected in the 51,000. So if you may recall, approximately 144,000 of fund balance was used to balance the school budget for FY21. 52,000 of that amount coming from reserved funds for capital needs. I believe there was a capital project at the high school slated to be completed in FY21. We don't know what the status of that project is, or even if the high school is continuing to move forward with that in FY21. The remaining amount was an estimated surplus carryover, which did fall short of $92,000, which was initially anticipated. But in speaking with Tommy, he feels very strongly that there will be capital savings and other operational savings throughout the year to help bridge that gap so that the $144,000. There won't be any additional amount coming from fund balance to bridge the budget hole. But as far as any set aside for capital needs from this amount, no, there's none of this that is set aside for capital.
Okay, from a process or policy standpoint, am I remembering correctly, there is for when the school division does finish with a surplus, there is a certain amount or percentage that is to be dedicated to capital?
Thought we said 50%.
I'm not aware of that policy. I will have to speak with Tommy and see if there is any school policy for budget surpluses. I'll have to get some information and report back. I'm not aware of that policy.
Leslie, do you recall?
Yeah, I think 2 years ago we changed it. There used to not be a policy that it would just go into the fund. And I think 2 years ago when we started that high school reserve, I thought we said 50% would go to capital. Is that right, David? And the
Yes,
rest would go into the schools could decide what to do with it, but 50% was supposed to go to the future high school needs.
I recall that too.
Okay.
But then again, these conditions are the reason why it's good for the schools and for us to have a rainy day fund in case you need to tap into it.
Absolutely. Other questions for Jake?
Jake, if I can go back to the utility expenses, and I don't know if you'll have an answer. I know Chuck attends a lot of MSA meetings, but MSA construct their budget balancing off of what we anticipate to pay as our expenses and also the county. And therefore, when we pay significantly more in treatment and so on, how does that impact them in a very, very positive way? Or do they build their budget anticipating that we will use more water and than we wanted to?
I believe the MSA does build their budget anticipating use of water. And that's historically the way their budget has been built. I do know that Jeff Martone has been in contact with Jordan Combs over at MSA about this water leak issue, which will be a significant reduction in water sales for MSA. He has been in contact with him, so he is aware of that situation moving forward. But I do believe that is how MSA plans their budget based upon anticipated usage.
Okay, so on one hand, I mean, this year when we, obviously, well, the last couple of years, we've had to purchase or pay to treat way more water than we had anticipated. That might be a nice surplus for the MSA, but now going forward, hopefully we're addressing some of those issues. And now the MSA needs to be concerned about that leak being fixed at VMI and us not being charged for those gallons. So, okay, appreciate that. Thanks, Jake.
Sure.
If I may, that change in their fiscal situation occurs both on the water side and the wastewater side, because we don't purchase the water. We also don't pay for the treatment and wastewater. And my understanding is it's not that they have a surplus because they had excess revenues from the city. They counted on those revenues and now they're going to have a budget shortfall. So what they'll do is raise rates to all their customers to make up for the shortfall, I'm afraid.
Well, exactly. And completely related to the VMI leak, when it's a very rainy spring, as it was last year, 2 years ago, when we were transferring $500,000, I mean, major funds that we were transferring, in theory, would have helped the last few years at the MSA. And going forward, yes, they'll have to fix the hole in their budget of the VMI leak. But previous years, they've benefited from us under budgeting the amount of water that we're going to be paying for.
Can I ask, I'm curious what percentage of the MSA's budget is the city of Lexington, like, compared to the other clients of the MSA? Are we 10%? Are we 30%? Because clearly they're going to have to, spread this out there across their clients. And I'm just curious what percentage will come back to us, basically.
Yeah, and I don't have an exact percentage for you, Dennis, but being that the MSA's only two customers are the county PSA and the city, The city is a significant portion of their budget, and any decreases in revenues that they're seeing from the city, they will have to work to address moving forward. That would be a significant shortfall for them.
I think we're about 60% of their budget revenue for water. After the previous year or two in wastewater, I don't know where that percentage has varied, but I think on the water side, we're about 60%.
Good questions and significant issues as we have these regional partnerships and sort through the details. And I can't remember what the last increase or last year's increase was from the MSA, but it's been quite significant on the water rates for all of us. Other questions that council has?
I have I'm just trying to recall when we were putting together the budget over some difficult meetings because we had budget cuts. And we said we would, I believe, revisit some things. Did we say September?
Yes, I do recall in our discussions that we would revisit the budget, probably several times throughout FY20. At this point, in looking at revenues and in order to have an accurate forecast of what revenues will look like, Jim and I have spoken and are targeting November around the time of the first quarter financial report for FY21 to start looking at our revenues. We'll then have several months to judge how revenues may be tracking for the year, as well as to over the next several months evaluate this additional surplus amount and find ways that we may be able to plug that into the budget with a recommendation coming around the time of the first quarter financial report.
Okay, yeah, because that makes sense. I didn't think we'd actually have a real discussion, but I'm glad to hear that we'll revisit that at some point pretty soon. I just want to just say that I'm hoping we could take a look again at recycling. I've received a lot of comments and concerns from citizens that more than anything actually about that being cut from our budget. And I'd like to make sure that's on the agenda when we do come back to revisit some of those, potentially putting some things back into the budget, if we can do that.
Michelle, I would tell you, I know staff is working on a list, if you will, of first things or prioritized recommendations. And my perception, and Jim, if you want to speak to this, looking at recycling, because of the state of recycling in general, the single stream curbside recycling probably is not a reality to properly or function very well in the next little while, 12 to 36 months. And I believe Jim and Jake and Jeff Martone have been talking about different ideas related to that, because I think everyone on council's been getting quite a bit of concern from folks of what to do with their wine bottles as well as their newspapers.
Mr. Mayor, you are correct. We're looking at options out there. And also, as you indicated, the climate and opportunities for recycling have changed over the years. Single stream recycling really doesn't work. You get contaminants in the recycling, and most of those loads end up in the landfill. And it's very difficult in an unmanned situation when people just put their recycling out in a box by the curbside to control what goes in those recycling containers. And a very small percentage of that load can contaminate the whole load. Not only do we get no recoverable cost for it, again, it goes in the landfill. So we're looking at separated recycling and certain products that do have a market to see what we can do. No guarantees at this time, but that seems to be the most opportune way to handle recycling going into the future.
Thank you.
Just to add off of that, the only modified version of single stream that's really still prevalent is what the county refers to as commingled recycling, which is essentially plastic bottles and aluminum cans. Those can easily be combined together. But when you start adding in the mixed paper and the glass, that easily contaminates the load and makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the processor to separate. So true single stream has kind of gone by the wayside, but plastic bottles and cans still remains viable.
I even get questions from people about the larger types of trash that need to go out. And this is probably not the time for this conversation, but since the recycling truck is not running, perhaps the truck that has the larger items to collect could run more often, so that people are not leaving things out on the side of the road for a week waiting for the Wednesday pickup.
Well, we certainly can look at that, but you may recall that when we stopped recycling, we actually cut people from Public Works. That was part of our savings. So I'm sure we have the vehicle left, but I'm not sure we have anybody to drive it and man it. But I'll look at it with Jeff Martone.
Okay, thanks.
To your point, Marilyn, it's tough when if you do some work on the weekend and take something out and your pickup is not until Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. It may sit out there a little bit longer, but would definitely say the crews do a great job of the significant amount of things that are left on the curb that they do get hauled away for us.
Well, people would actually like to take it somewhere themselves, but there's nowhere to take it.
Gotcha. Other questions that council has? One thing I would point out is Jake is recommending that the additional $555 to be withheld from fund balance and carried with no appropriations at this time. One thing that I would like to plant a seed for folks to think about as we review and see what the coming year brings with revenues. As part of the exercise in looking at our city cemeteries and personally visiting Evergreen Cemetery, the entrance is in very poor condition. And I'm not sure I know there's been conversations of staff, especially when we were going through the cemetery master plan, but I don't recall any dollar figures tied to either repairing or perhaps replacing that entrance. So I'd like to plant a seed, unless anyone objects, for staff to have that on their radar as a project that if revenues turn out to be better than we anticipate and we're able to take on some projects, that's one that we may take a look at in our efforts.
You won't hear any complaints from me. And I know that Jeff has been looking at pricing for repair of the pillars, but if he needs direction to take a look at the scope of the entire entrance area, he probably should be made aware of that to start looking at pricing and design and planning of the entrance period.
Thank you, Marilyn.
I can assure you we'll take a look at that since it's been mentioned. It's a very good project. It's good use of some of those extra funds, and we'll just take a look at some pricing or some cost as far as improvements, and we can lay them on the table and evaluate if it's a priority going forward.
And we certainly hope they do become extra funds and not covering funds as we move forward. Members of council have any other questions relative to the presentations from Jake on the fourth quarter financial report or the carryover amounts? Hearing none. When we do get into the regular meeting, we will address both of these issues and need to consider them with our typical roll call vote. Is there any other information or items to discuss or for the good of the cause?
I'd just like to thank Jake for his presentation. I think because your written report was so thorough as well as your presentation, that's why there were so few questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to close by echoing Jim's sentiments. Big shout out to our staff showing great sound fiscal discipline this last fourth quarter of FY20. When I came on board, we were not only building the FY21 budget up from the ground again after COVID set in on us, but also working to slam the brakes on FY20 and save whatever we could for the remaining months. So it was a very challenging time, but I think everyone rose to the occasion, and we're very, very pleased with the end results of FY20. So congrats to our staff.
Jake, thank you.
Thank you
Jacob.
for that great job. It really did step into a very difficult year, and I've been really impressed with your team, and you all I know have worked hard, and it shows. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Jim, did you have a word?
I did. I think I'd recalled somebody had asked about what the cemetery fund balances might be. I don't know, Jake, were you going to touch on that at this juncture, or are we going to wait for the regular meeting?
We can certainly wait for that item during the regular meeting. I can touch on it now if council would like.
I would say we have a couple minutes. Please go ahead and touch on those.
Certainly. So we did include in the regular session some information on balances of the cemetery trust fund. So the closing value of the investment portfolio in the trust fund at the end of June 30th, was $1,500,935. And we get this information, we get statements from the trust on a quarterly basis. So I'll receive my next statements in October. But that is the closing value of the fund at the end of June. Additionally, there's also, and it can be confusing, but there's also the Cemetery Care Fund, which is a separate pool of money. And this is managed internally. This is not in any other external investment. It's the vast majority of it is held in the LGIP account for the city. The balance of that at the end of July was $464,968. And this primarily comes from setting aside half of the annual lot sales for the cemetery into this care fund each year at the conclusion of the fiscal year. The LGIP interest rate has really tapered off significantly over the last several months, but we do keep this amount in the LGIP for liquidity and in order to address cemetery maintenance and care needs.
Jake, on the trust fund, reading through when we're doing the cemetery research, that can only be used for the formerly Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery. Is that correct? Because it came from the Presbyterian Church when they gave us the cemetery.
That is correct. It is only for that particular cemetery, and the deed which created the trust and conveyed ownership to the city also specifically required that only withdrawals of interest be made, no withdrawals of principal. So that is a pretty significant restriction on the use of those funds.
Okay, thank you.
And something that we've been talking about for years, if I understand correctly, we pay about $15,000 to the bank and we get about $20,000 of interest, right? So we pay them 15 to make 20.
That's correct. The management fees for the bank are $15,000 each year. Our total dividends and interest earnings for the year were $36,422. So just a little less than half bank fees accounted for out of that amount.
Right.
I think it's important to point out that there are investment management fees and there is growth opportunity on the underlying assets. It's also downside risk, but it's not limited just to income.
That is correct. Yeah, there's an income aspect from dividends and interest earned, and also from total portfolio growth through the sale and purchase of securities that are within this fund.
Jake, with the funds in the LGIP, those you mentioned for liquidity purposes and for projects at the cemeteries, if I understood you correctly. On an annual basis, are we budgeting the income off of that for operations of the cemetery?
No, we're not budgeting this amount. We simply allocate interest earned on the LGIP account, and each month there's a journal entry that's executed that allocates that interest for the principal amount, which is $400,000, is allocated to the cemetery fund each month.
I know you said it's declined, but what's the approximate current interest rate on the LGIP?
LGIP, as of the end of July, and the last statement I have was 0.32%, which is significantly down from what it was before COVID. It was as high as 2.5%.
Right. And are there any restrictions on the 464,000 as to, or investment restrictions?
No, there are no investment restrictions on this. This is a completely internally managed account of funds for cemetery maintenance and care.
Sure, thank you. Very good. Other questions from council? Well, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Gary Swink, who we enjoyed his expertise for a number of years, and it's nice to see his legacy carry on, and Jake with the great training he did, extending his time before he actually retired. So I'm sure Gary's not on Facebook watching us right now, but if he were, or if anyone else knows and sees Gary, tell him thank you for his service to the city and getting Jake trained up well for a great job tonight. I'm sure he's exceedingly proud. I've got 7:39 and our regular meeting starts at 8 o'clock. So unless there's anything else, I would like to adjourn this meeting and we'll take it up at 8. Thank you.
just collapsed. It said the internet connection was unstable.
As we approach the hour of 8 o'clock, appreciate everybody being here and being on time. And before we call the meeting to order, changing things up a little bit from our normal. Although it's requested that prior notification be given to the city manager or mayor by individuals wishing to address the council, public comments are always welcome. I ask that you sign up prior to our meeting, and you will be recognized during the citizens' remarks section of the council's agenda. And we will adhere to that. And I think we received several letters, but we only have one person who's zooming in to speak with us this evening, as I understand it. So it is the appointed hour of 8 o'clock, and I would like to call the Lexington City Council Thursday, September 3rd, 2020 meeting to order. First item of business, if you will all please stand and join me in saluting our flag. I pledge allegiance
To the
Flag.
Flag
of the United States of America,
to the
and
republic,
Republic,
and
for which it
one
stands,
nation, under God,
nation,
indivisible,
liberty, and
liberty and
justice.
justice for all.
Thank you all very much. In consideration of the agenda, any changes or observations? Under section 9.3, it's talking about the second quarter financial review, and I think that should read the fourth quarter. So when we get to that item, we will be dealing with the fourth quarter.
Yes, sir.
Review, and I think that should read the fourth quarter. So when we get to that item, we will be dealing with the fourth quarter. I'm hearing myself feeding back here. That's peculiar, and I see
I
everyone.
think you have your Facebook stream not muted.
I don't have Facebook activated.
Somebody's
Michelle's
Facebook stream.
screen. I think it's Michelle's screen, maybe. Is hers having problems?
Well, in this technological age, this is one of those things that can be a little tricky. Hopefully that will silence itself and you won't have to hear me twice. Over the past week or so, we've had several communications as the school has pivoted on their plans for opening, and I have a prepared statement to share with everyone. On August 20th, Lexington City School Superintendent Rebecca Walters made a presentation regarding the Lexington City Schools opening plans and the use of the federal government CARES funds, which had been allocated to the school division. The following Monday, the Lexington City School Board held a special called meeting where the superintendent reversed course and recommended a virtual opening plan for the first 9 weeks and pushed back the school start date to September 8th. The school board voted unanimously to accept the recommendation. Like my neighbors, like my 7th grader, and like many of you, I was disappointed to learn of the abrupt change. This change sent families into panic and scramble mode to adapt to the reality of this decision and the final financial impact it will have. Thank you to the many families who have written to the school board and to City Council to express your concerns and your support. Several letters have asked City Council to reverse the vote of the school board. I'd like to offer a brief civics lesson. The citizens of Lexington elect the City Council members. The City Council has the responsibility and authority to appoint citizens to the school board and to fund the school operations. The City School Board solely is responsible for the policies and procedures and oversight of the school operations. The City Council does not have the authority to overrule or reverse school board decisions. Personally, I love my time serving on the school board from 1999 to 2006. And for me, the question to be answered for every decision facing the school board was, how is this in the best interest of our children? While I don't like the outcome of the vote taken by the school board, I respect it. And I respect the work of the school board and the employees of the school division, as I know they remain focused on the best, safest education for our children. Therefore, looking forward, it is incumbent upon the school board to provide clear communications and criteria on achieving the goal of an in-person instruction. The school board meeting on August 24th was disappointing as there was no public input, a limit of 100 participants, and 1 week prior to the scheduled opening. For the upcoming meeting, the school board has made arrangements for up to 500 participants and individuals who wish to address the school board via Zoom or by phone can sign up in advance by contacting Stephanie Birch at 540-463-7146 or email at sbirch@lexedu.org for the next meeting, which is scheduled for 5:30 p.m. Wednesday, September 9th, 2020. COVID knows no boundaries and has dramatically impacted us all. This virus has tested our wit, our mettle, and our patience. However, COVID cannot overcome the strength and resiliency of our community when we unite to focus on doing good. I wanted to share that and is available if anyone needs a copy. The clerk would be glad to provide that to you. Next item I'd like to move into are presentations and would invite Jake to address council.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening once again, council members. As discussed in the work session, the attached list of carryovers requested to carry from FY20 to FY21 are presented for your review. If these are approved by City Council, the annual financial report at the end of the fiscal year will reflect these amounts as committed fund balance. So this will reserve the funds which are needed to complete projects or other activities of the city. Important to note, the $812,555 budget surplus for the general fund came in significantly higher than we had anticipated. $282,000 was budgeted. We're pleased to be able to present an additional $530,555 in surplus. We're recommending at this time that this amount is withheld from fund balance and carried into FY20, FY21 with no associated appropriations at this time. Our recommendation to council is to approve these carryovers from FY20 into FY21 and the amounts in the attached document.
Thank you, Jake. You've heard Jake's recommendation and had an opportunity to review the item when you received your packet, and ask for your consideration.
Move to approve list of funds to be reserved to carry over from fiscal 20 to fiscal 21 for expenses, projects, and programs not completed as of June 30th, 21 as presented by our finance director.
Second.
Thank you, Chuck, and second by Leslie. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote. Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Sigler?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Next item, public hearings. Public hearing to and consideration of renaming the Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery. And Jim, did you want to speak to this matter?
Well, very briefly, we've had a lot of conversation about this matter. I think it's clear to all of us what the council's intent is and where we've been. So I guess the message tonight is that you are all set to, I believe, make a recommendation. I shouldn't say recommendation, that's already occurred, but make a motion perhaps as to what the name of the former Stonewall Jackson Cemetery will now be. So you're well aware of where we stand. I turn it over to council.
Thank you, sir. Would like to open the public hearing and invite anyone who would like to speak. And Janie, as I recall, there were a few written comments. And the first one, I believe, is for Marilyn, if you'd like to pick that up, and Dennis is on deck.
Sure. By consensus, Stonewall Jackson is the greatest general or flag officer in the history of America. He lies in the shadow of his beloved Virginia Military Institute. It has been reported that you intend to desecrate his name. Take pause. Robert D. Barrett, disabled United States veteran.
This message is from Gina Longo. Dear Ms. Hostetter, it has come to my attention that a change of name of the Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery to Oak Grove Cemetery is being proposed. I am strongly and vehemently opposed to any such name change, and I am disgusted that such a thing is even being considered. I have relatives lying at peace in that cemetery, and the thought of their lives being consigned to the scrap heap of history simply because of a knee-jerk reaction to the current erase all the history we don't agree with idiocy is abhorrent. Erasing history will not change it. We need to remember our history, especially the difficult, disagreeable, uncomfortable parts of our history so that we don't repeat it. Do not change the name of the cemetery. I can think of no greater way to disrespect and dishonor the people in it. Sincerely, Gina Longo.
This is from Norma Longo. Dear Ms. Hostetter, Mr. Mayor, and Lexington City Council members, in response to a notice on the Lexington website, I am sending you comments about the disturbing name changes that are taking place or about to take place in Lexington. I wholeheartedly object to such travesties as changing the name of the Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery and the hospital, which I understand has already been changed, sadly, and Washington and Lee University, Lee Chapel, and so on. Apparently, someone has already removed the Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery sign. I have a lot of relatives buried there and believe you should keep the name as is, Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery. If the Lexington City Council is to have a vote on changing the name to Oak Grove Cemetery on September 3rd, I wish to strongly object to such a name change. The name Oak Grove Cemetery is so overused already, and it is not nearly as impressive as Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery, where our relatives are buried. In my family history records, it will always be Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery, and in Lexington, it should remain that. There are already cemeteries named Oak Grove Cemetery in numerous states, including Michigan, Georgia, Massachusetts, Ohio, Kentucky, Arkansas, Texas, Illinois, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Oklahoma, and North Carolina. And there are several named in Virginia already. Lexington should not rename Stonewall Jackson Cemetery at all, and particularly not name it an overused name like Oak Grove Cemetery. It is a mistake to rid Lexington of all Confederate names, just as it is a mistake to rid the United States of Confederate names. It is wrong not to allow Confederate descendants to remember and honor their ancestors and others who are not related but are warmly remembered and amazing and honorable men. I urge this Lexington City Council to keep the name Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery. Thank you. Sincerely, Norma Longo.
I have a note from Michael and Doris Strickler. We have a unique city named Lexington. You, as members of City Council, should be doing everything possible to promote that name. My wife and I have lived in Lexington for 32 years, and my mother was born and raised here. My parents are buried in the former Stonewall Jackson Cemetery, and we have a plot there. We are, and we know you are, proud of the name Lexington. This has nothing to do with exclusivity. We have 2 cemeteries within the geographical boundaries of Lexington. My goodness, why in the world would we not want to have the name Lexington for the cemetery off Main Street, as well as the Evergreen Cemetery, instead of incredibly a generic name such as Oak Grove? We strongly urge you to reconsider your current decision. Michael and Doris Strickler, 630 Stonewall Street.
Sorry. Dear City Council members, thank you for choosing Oak Grove as the new name for the erstwhile SJM Cemetery. It's a name that will be complementary to Evergreen, both evoking the peace of nature. I also agree with her decision to drop the of Lexington bit. As Mr. Hallis said, there are no other Oak Grove cemeteries anywhere near us, so the place tag is not necessary, while at the same time adding it would have necessitating adding the same bit to Evergreens. But while I agree that of Lexington is redundant, I think that each of the cemeteries should have cemetery in its name, and hope that that was already the plan. Ms. Alexander and Ms. Strawn suggested that both cemeteries should get new and similar signs, since both cemeteries belong to Lexington and need to be brought to parity. I think that's an excellent idea too. Since no suggestion was made as to how to achieve that, perhaps you could consider making both signs the same shape as the official Welcome to Lexington signs currently placed at various entrances to the city. Sincerely, Tamara Duval, Lexington.
Janie, I wanted to confirm that there's no one else who would like to speak.
That was all I had for the cemetery.
Thank you, ma'am. With that, I'd like to close the public hearing and ask for council's consideration of ordinance 2020.09.
I move to approve. What was the ordinance number? I'm sorry.
Sure, ordinance 2020.09.
Ordinance 2020.09, renaming the renaming the Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery.
Second.
Have a motion by Chuck, a second by Marilyn. I would ask, is there any discussion?
I'll just make the comment that I think that by renaming the cemetery, that it'll be welcoming to everybody while still retaining all the history in the cemetery. If anything, I hope we broaden the history in the cemetery to tell more stories and more histories.
I'd like to read a quick statement, if I may. I don't do this very often, but I feel it's important in this case. This was published in several different publications, but wanted to read it for the record for the minutes. Overlooking or going past the duties and responsibilities of City Council from our website and our handbook, I'll move forward to the statement. My role as a steward of the city means I look out for what I believe is best for Lexington, all of Lexington. I have lived here for almost 30 years and I moved into the city 12 years ago. I am currently serving my third term on City Council, so I guess I'm doing a pretty good job. Regarding the name of the cemetery, my awareness and perspective of it has changed. For me, it had always been part of the landscape in plain sight. I was married in R.E. Lee Episcopal Church, now Grace, and my children were baptized there. They were born in Stonewall Jackson's hospital, as was my wife. Her mom is buried in Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery. So let's talk about General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Many opponents to the name change use examples of his teaching of his slaves and of others, described even at risk of his arrest, his dedication to his first and second wives, and his devotion to his church, Lexington Presbyterian, and his professorship at Virginia Military Institute. And all of these roles are described at the Stonewall Jackson House, owned and operated by VMI. This is the best place for us to educate about Jackson in his entirety. However, I would argue that if you polled people who was Stonewall Jackson, the vast majority will bring up his military career in the Confederate Army. I have not conducted any such poll. The states that seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America did so in the defense of slavery. It is written in their ordinances of secession and emphasized in the CSA Vice President Stevens' cornerstone address. Jackson owned slaves and fought ferociously for the CSA and defended their right and his to own slaves. Whether or not Jackson had philosophical differences in these regards is not the issue before me concerning the name of the cemetery. His actions in war speak for themselves, and our cemetery memorializes Jackson the general, not Jackson the father, husband, etc., as his statue displays him in uniform with sword and field glasses. The plaque at the cemetery states, "The graveyard is now named Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery, a tribute to Confederate General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson, who is buried there with his family beneath his monument." This place reflects the history and culture of the early Scots-Irish settlers and the importance they placed on education. The town, now city, of Lexington took ownership and oversight of the cemetery in 1949 from the Lexington Presbyterian Church. The deed states, quote, it may be desirable to provide a new name for the cemetery. The designation Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery is suggested, unquote. That name has, by city ordinance, officially been in place since then, and still is, as council has passed no ordinance yet for a new name. But the signs have been removed, and its effect on tourism should be negligible. Visitors interested in Jackson don't come for the sign, they come for the man. Likely, it will have a positive effect, and I'm confident that we are not at risk creating an unwelcoming environment for some residents and business owners who then may choose to leave, but to the contrary, creating a more welcoming environment for those who wish to stay. While other members of council may have different reasons for changing the name, we are in agreement that it must be changed. The fact that the cemetery name says Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery and that Jackson owned slaves and fought for slavery is displayed in uniform, and the cemetery is there in tribute of his services for the Confederacy. Memorializing General Jackson in a Lexington City cemetery announces to everyone that the city and its residents support Jackson and what he stood and fought for. For me, memorializing Jackson in this way is unacceptable and indefensible, and thus the name must be changed. As for the concerns for those who plan to be buried there or have family in the cemetery for the honor of it, changing the name changes nothing else. Jackson is still buried there, and as is his family. His statue is on private property. His statue is private property, and whose lives are improved or diminished, I cannot speak to. But I would state that as a community and as a region, we have raised ourselves up a bit, demonstrating that as times change, we are able to tackle difficult issues and do our best to resolve them. These issues generate incredible amounts of emotion and passion, which easily cloud the process if allowed, making rational and clear decisions become that much more difficult. I pride myself on using logic and facts, time and deliberation, and careful thought in my decision-making process. Hopefully, this letter supports that. Thank you.
I have a motion and a second on the floor. Thank you, Chuck, for sharing those words and perspective. Does anyone on council wish to make any other comments?
I would just like to thank everyone on any side of this issue who made the effort to make their thoughts known. The amount of civic involvement through this has been impressive, and I do appreciate that, even if I disagree with some of the comments that we've received. So I want to thank everybody on every side. Thank you.
It's nice to live in a community where the community is fully engaged, to be sure. Anyone else? Hearing none, I'd ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Ms. Strong?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
It passes unanimously, and ordinance 2020-09 is in effect. Dennis, to build on your words, I'd like to remind us all to focus on helping others and uplifting those in need. And remember the words of Leon C. Megginson, paraphrasing Darwin. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one most adaptable to change. Clearly, we all will embrace the change of life without COVID in our rearview mirror, or with COVID in our rearview mirror. But as we have on this issue, and we will on issues in the future, let's all work together respectfully to do the community's work. Next item is ordinance 2020-10, incorporating the budget amendments of the fourth quarter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly like to run through the appropriations requested in order to close out fiscal year 2020. In the general fund, the city received a primary extension paving grant in the amount of $33,890 for repaving a portion of North Main Street. No expense adjustment is needed at this time. The city received $15,764 from HHS as part of the Provider Relief Fund of the CARES Act. This is separate from the Coronavirus Relief Fund. These funds are permitted to offset revenue losses from rescue service fees, and no appropriation is needed with this adjustment. The city received its first allotment of CARES Act Coronavirus Relief Fund in FY20 in the amount of $649,635. Of this amount, $295,478 in revenue adjustments is needed to offset reimbursable expenses incurred in FY20. We do not need a expense appropriation at this time since significant savings are existent, but those expenses incurred are as follows: $199,243 in personnel costs for fire, EMS, and police, $64,964 in funding to the Community Foundation for nonprofit grants, and $31,271 in PPE, hand sanitizer, and various other health and janitorial expenses for the city. Finally, in the general fund, $6,051 is needed to cover an additional contribution to RARO within the leisure services function of government, as well as slightly higher maintenance costs at the municipal pool. More than sufficient savings are found in the general government administration function to cover this expense. In the school fund, $56,390 is needed to cover higher than budgeted expenses in the administration function, and $9,979 is needed to cover higher than budgeted expenses in operations and maintenance. More than sufficient savings exist in the instruction function to cover these overages. And finally, in the utility fund, $351,778 of fund balance is needed to be appropriated to cover higher than expected treatment costs paid to the Maury Service Authority, as well as capital expenses incurred in FY20 planned to be covered by fund balance instead of other financing sources. Significant savings do exist, however, to cover a portion of these overages. Staff's recommendation to council is to adopt ordinance 2020-10, incorporating budget amendments for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2020.
Unmute, Frank.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Need all the help I can get also. Jake, thanks for the good work and for the good details on that presentation. Janie, I'm not aware of anyone that has called in or written in to speak to this matter. Can you confirm that, please?
I don't have anyone waiting to speak on this.
And we don't have any letters on this. So open the public hearing, and not aware of anyone wishing to speak. I will close the public hearing and ask for council's consideration.
I make a motion that we adopt ordinance 2020-10, incorporating budget amendments for the fourth quarter of FY 2020.
Second.
I have a motion from David, a second from Dennis. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote. Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Mr. Braun?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Ayers? Mr. Ayers, I'm sorry.
Aye.
See that name and I think of your sister. Marilyn Alexander?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you all very much. Next item is ordinance 2020-11.
Yes, thank you. And 2020-11 covers necessary budget amendments for the first quarter of FY21. We would not normally do these until the FY21 first quarter financial report. However, with significant CARES-related expenditures already incurred, we thought it appropriate to go ahead and request appropriations at this time. To summarize, in all funds, the carryover amounts that you previously approved are requested to be carried over, and not all amounts will require an appropriation at this time. The fire reserve account received a testamentary gift in the amount of $78,581 The volunteer fire members voted to request an appropriation of $10,000 for additional exercise equipment at the firehouse. From the remaining balance of the Phase 1 CARES Coronavirus Relief Fund allotment, appropriations are needed as follows at this time. $4,065 in public works personnel expenditures incurred for installation of facilities modifications, $7,452 in various ongoing PPE, hand sanitizer, miscellaneous cleaning supplies, $12,650 in IT improvements for remote work capabilities, $105,586 in facilities modifications, $81,204 for the city schools allocation, and $129,927 transferred to the IDA fund for the small business grant program in partnership with Main Street Lexington. Additionally, the Phase 2 CARES Coronavirus Relief Fund allotment was received on August 5th. Again, this was the same amount as the first allocation of $649,635. No appropriations are requested at this time as we continue to develop an allocation plan for this funding. $51,006 received from the state for CARES funding from the Department of Elections. This is for 2020 election expenses. We do not have any incurred appropriations to request at this time. Finally, an appropriation for the general fund is needed in the amount of $1,500 for the VJ CCCA budget. Their state budget did include $1,500 for the purchase of a laptop that unfortunately did not make it to our local budget, but this amount will come from state funds received by the city. So we do need an appropriation to cover that expense. In the school fund, the $81,204 CARES allocation will need to be appropriated to cover reimbursable expenses incurred by the city. In the utility fund, again, the $351,778 of fund balance will need to be appropriated to cover the higher than expected treatment costs and capital expenses incurred in FY21. And finally, for the equipment replacement fund and the capital projects fund, carryover amounts will be appropriated to cover ongoing capital expenses and equipment purchases in FY21. And our recommendation to City Council is to adopt Ordinance 2020-11, incorporating these budget amendments for the first quarter of FY21.
Thank you, Jake. This time I'd like to open the public hearing for Ordinance 2020-11. Janie, can you affirm no one is dialed in or sent in any messages?
You are correct.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd like to close the public hearing for Ordinance 2020-11 and ask for council's consideration.
Make a motion to adopt ordinance 2020-11, incorporating the budget amendments for the first quarter of FY 2021.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Ziegler and a second by Ms. Alexander. Roll call vote. Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. The next item is consideration of minutes. We have the July 16 and July 30. If there's no objection, I would ask for your consideration of those together.
I move that we approve the July 16th and July 13th meeting minutes as presented.
We'll have a mild correction there. I assume you intended to say July 30, not 13th.
Sorry, July 30th, sorry. Yes.
Second.
Thank you, David. A motion by Dennis, second by David. Roll call vote. Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Strong?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. And Janie, thanks for the time and effort. Can't remember how many pages, but it was a heck of a lot of pages, so thank you. Next is the time for citizens' remarks and comments. We do have a couple of people who have zoomed in or trying to zoom in to speak to different matters. I would ask that these guidelines be followed when addressing City Council. When we're in person, I ask you to stand at the podium and state your name and address for the clerk to record for the record. Make your comments to the council as a whole. Be brief, state your position, and provide facts. Provide written statements and or supporting materials to the clerk for distribution to the council and the city manager. This is not a time for debate. It is prohibited. Speak clearly, as we want to hear what you have to say. And under normal circumstances in person, we'd ask you to limit your comments to 3 minutes. I haven't said that as much with the write-ins that we've received. And we do have one extremely long letter from a constituent. And in consultation with the city attorney, our 3-minute rule could apply, but we my inclination is to allow the entire letter to be read tonight. But going forward, we'll ask people to moderate their writings to City Council to conform with that 3-minute component. And with that, I think the first person to speak is Janice Friend. Janice, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Please, the floor is yours. Please go right ahead.
Dear City Council, thank you for hearing these public comments. I am bringing you my concerns about Lexington City School District's closure decision because although I'm aware that you do not have direct control over the city board, I believe you do have the ability to call joint meetings and to investigate if there's cause for dismissal. So I'm asking that you investigate this decision and require real answers and accountability from the school board. Rebecca Walters and Tim Diet have stated to me in public and private communications that as teachers prepared for school, they became increasingly concerned. While I have sympathy, concern is not an appropriate metric on when to close schools. On August 19th, 2 days after a concerning report was received from Virginia Department of Health saying we're now a moderate transmission area, Rebecca Walters sent an email to every family stating schools would open and orientation would go forth. Adequate warning for families and open records laws were not served by any of these choices. They also mentioned the shortage of substitutes, but could not manage to fill in a college town positions requiring only a high school diploma and 2 years of college. While many other schools, including Central, have remained open for our youngest learners, Lexington City Schools tell us that full-day in-person instruction can be replaced for kindergartners by 3 hours of online instruction. I'm sure everyone here is aware of the wealth of data from the CDC, American Academy of Pediatrics, Virginia Department of Health, and Virginia Department of Education, indicating that for K through 2, in-person instruction is critical and cannot be effectively replaced by virtual school. Meanwhile, transmission in our area of this health district remains low. The week this decision was made, there were 3 cases in Univista, Rockbridge, and Lexington combined. When exactly does the school board expect that we will have fewer than 3 cases per week? What numerical criteria must be met? I have seen actual metrics for other school districts. We need to see database decisions, more specific than hopes and concerns, made in a non-emergency fashion. The school superintendent is well paid to balance teachers' concerns with the needs of 500 students. An emergency meeting after 5 months to plan ignores everything except teachers' concerns. I want the superintendent to remember that students and families are tax-paying stakeholders in the schools, to be held to making database plans, to adapt them as needed, and to try to actually solve personnel problems before making drastic choices with drastic consequences. Finally, under the criteria laid forth at the school board meeting and in Tim Diet's emails, I cannot see schools opening before January. Possibly the teachers are holding out for a vaccine, expected by experts next summer. If this is the case, the superintendent needs to be held by council to a requirement to make that clear now, receive public comment now, and plan how to mitigate the serious damage this will cause now. Thank you.
Ms. Friend, thank you for joining us and sharing those words. In the event that you weren't with us earlier, it bears repeating the next school board meeting where I think many of those issues will be addressed, and there will be a opportunity for public discussion or public comments is September 9th at 5:30 via Zoom, and hope that you'll be able to join the school board in that discussion. The next individual I believe that wanted to speak was Michelle Connor, and I believe Michelle's with us. depending upon when you join, Michelle, we do ask that you share with us or that you keep your comments to 3 minutes if at all possible. Michelle, are you with us?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. You have the floor.
Hi, my name is Michelle Connor, and I live in Buena Vista, Virginia. I have a few questions. I was told that maybe you could answer them. This might not be the appropriate time, but I have a lot of residents that has been asking me a whole lot of questions. I run part of the group called the Happens of Rockbridge County. After research going back on the name Oak Grove, I have since learned that Stonewall Jackson was a Sunday school teacher there. If we're trying to get away from prejudice and race and people are having a hard time with Robert E. Lee and things like that, what good would it be doing to pick a name like Oakwood? Can you tell me if that's a viable name, or is it other one being considered?
We did earlier with an ordinance. It's actually Oak Grove.
If we're trying to get away from prejudice, what good would it be doing to pick a name like Oakwood? Yes, sir. That's if I'm wrong. Can you tell me if that's, yes, sir. The name was gotten because that was a meeting place where now the Lexington Presbyterian Church now stands on the corner. And doing research on that building, I found out that Stonewall Jackson was a Sunday school teacher there. Even though he had many African Americans that attended his class, aren't we still going back? That's just my question.
Sure. This is not a forum for debate and discussion. You're welcome to pose your questions, and perhaps you and I can speak offline to sort through some of those questions, or the city manager, depending upon the nature of your questions. But this is a time for you to address council with concerns or questions you'd like for us to hear.
Well, I appreciate the time. That was most of the questions being asked for me. I would like to thank the board. I know that your job is not easy, and I'd like to apologize from the citizens that find it totally reprehensible that they are slinging name calling and harsh comments. I really do apologize for that, because not all of us feel that way.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you for providing some civil dialogue and for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Very good.
I need those questions.
And Janie, can you confirm that those were the only two contacting us via Zoom?
Those are the only two I had. The rest were submitted via email.
Very good. So we will begin the reading of communications. And Leslie, I believe you're first.
Okay. A letter from Daniel. Hello all. I have a third grader at Waddell and just wanted to let you know that I support your decision to postpone in-person learning. All of the data that others are using to argue and throw tantrums about for opening schools now does not take into account that thousands of university students just returned to our town from all over the country. They're in the age group most likely to spread COVID asymptomatically, and they are living in dorms or barracks where it is very easy for it to spread. So it makes total sense to wait and make sure there is not an outbreak, and I appreciate your careful consideration and all your work. Please don't let a loud minority of upset parents get you down. Thanks, Daniel.
From Paul Baker. As a voter and constituent, I urge you to introduce and support the following resolution to not pass any control affecting local government buildings, parks, recreation, and community centers, or permitted events, including adjacent streets, or affecting the legal purchase, possession, or transfer of firearms or ammunition, even though a new state law allows for such ordinances. Here is a link to download the model resolution I would like you to support. It's vcdl.org/resources/2A resolutions/reg_cities/lexington.docx. Please let me know what you're going to do regarding introducing and supporting this resolution. Respectfully, Paul Baker.
This message is from Jenny and Matthew Krantz, members of the Lexington City Council. We write this note in support of the Lexington City School Board, superintendent, and other administrators, Lexington City Schools, principals, and staff. We would like to thank LCS, especially Dr. Walters, for the leadership navigating our schools through the pandemic crisis since March. We appreciate the hundreds of hours of research and preparation it has taken to develop and continuously adapt plans for the school system for a situation that is uncertain and fluid. We support and appreciate that they are making decisions in the best interests of staff and students as a whole, a decision that is impossible to please everyone. LCS has provided an exceptional learning experience for our children, and we have no doubt that this will continue virtually this fall. We have already shared this message of support with the school board and LCS, but felt it necessary to share with you all as well. Thank you for your service. Jenny and Matthew Krantz, parents of students at Waddell Elementary School.
This is from Dr. Reshif, Adam Siegel. Dear members of the City Council, thank you very much for taking the time to hear my comments regarding the recent City School District's closure decision. My name is Dr. Reshif Adam Siegel. I teach at VMI. Talia, my daughter, is starting kindergarten this year. I share many of the concerns of other commentators regarding the way the decision was taken and regarding the decision's timing. I am not at all convinced that the decision was taken based on sufficient data, and the timing of it 1 week before school was supposed to start was unjustifiably inconvenient, to put it mildly. I would like to highlight one point. The implications of that decision go far beyond the well-being of the students and of the staff. At least for some parents, the need to stay home with their children means that they will have to quit their jobs or accept pay cuts. Others will have to postpone business plans or plans for higher education and so on. The implication is that this decision puts a serious strain on our whole community. Although I believe the school board should retain its independence, there is a question in my mind regarding the desirability in such cases where the implications are so far-reaching, whether the school board should at least consult with the City Council. I would also like to point out that it appears as though other alternatives existed that did not require the schools to go fully online. Middle ground could have been found, but I am not at all convinced anyone searched for it. Other schools such as Woods Creek Montessori, Earth Song, and the county school, not to mention the local colleges, were able to find creative ways to minimize the risks of in-person teaching and allow for it. I cannot see a reason why we cannot do the same with the Lexington City Schools. I would finally like to express my support to the teachers. I myself teach at VMI, partially in person, and I feel it is my duty as part of our community to help maintain the normalcy of life as much as possible. Many thanks again.
I have a letter from Katie Macy. It's a little bit long, so bear with me if I stumble. It's about over 2,740 words. Dear Lexington City Council, my name is Katie Macy. I'm a parent of a Waddell first grade student and a licensed professional counselor specializing in play therapy with children and adolescents. I have provided counseling services to children of all ages in a downtown Lexington private practice for 6 years. Prior to that, I worked in a community mental health for 4 years, again with children and families. Previously, I worked in Fairfax County schools, coordinating with teachers, administrators, school counselors, and parents to improve the emotional, social, behavioral well-being of elementary and high school age students. For 15 years, I have focused on the emotional well-being of young people, particularly what parents, communities, and schools can do to provide children with what they need to thrive. I feel obligated to share my professional opinion with you. I've spent the past week figuring out how to best voice my concerns to you. I was appalled and shocked by the sudden and unjustified last-minute decision to have all grades K through 8 virtual. This shows a complete lack of awareness of the mental health and emotional needs of our students, particularly the younger ones. While yes, physical health is valued, it is equally important to take into account how our children and families are being negatively impacted by the isolation and lack of regular structured social engagement. My understanding of what transpired is there were a select few who voiced concerns related to the stress they were feeling on job responsibilities for the upcoming year. This turned into a justification to all virtual learning by utilizing misinterpreted data. Thus, the school board made an extreme decision in haste without proper metrics input, or planning. Brain chemistry and research have proven fear and anxiety will lead to irrational and illogical decisions. An insightful webinar back in the spring highlighted managing anxiety and fear within an organization prior to decision-making and planning during this pandemic. Up until Monday, August 24th, I was proud of Lexington City Schools being able to see the bigger picture and the value of in-person learning for our community and youth. The reasons I was given for why school for K through 3 will not be in person are unfounded. It is highly recommended by the Department of Education and the American Academy of Pediatrics that the younger students should be in person for school if at all possible. Reference the guidelines published on their websites. Our state is in phase 3, and if the data is interpreted correctly, Lexington and Rockbridge County are not justified in declaring phase 2 by the guidelines set forth by the VDH. Even if they were accurate in making the phase 2 shift, in-person learning is advised by the Department of Ed and the American Academy of Pediatrics for K through 3 students for many valid and important reasons. Citation of a website. This is substantiated by countless research studies related to best environments and practices for learning and social emotional development. As both organizations emphasize in their reports and recommendations for this school year, social, emotional, and family needs should be prioritized in the school board and superintendent's decision-making process. See both their website documents on planning and preparing for COVID school reopening guidelines. Directly quoting from the American Academy of Pediatrics guidance, this focus on overall health and well-being includes addressing the behavioral mental health needs of students and staff. The AAP strongly advocates that all policy considerations for the coming school year should start with the goal of having students physically present in school. The importance of in-person learning is well documented, and there is already evidence of the negative impacts on children because of school closures in the spring of 2020. Lengthy time away from school and associated interruption of supportive services often results in social isolation, making it difficult for schools to identify and address important learning deficits, as well as child and adolescent physical or sexual abuse, substance abuse, depression, and suicidal ideation. This, in turn, places children and adolescents at considerable risk of morbidity and, in some cases, mortality. Citation, a website. Our school system has an opportunity to provide these children with what they need and deserve. Social isolation and excessive time connected to virtual communication will be detrimental to the younger students' development. Countless medical and psychological research studies have shown how important regular in-person social engagement is for mental health, development, and learning, particularly in the pre-K and early elementary years. The risk factors of prolonged lack of these experiences will lead to increases in depression, anxiety, obesity, underdeveloped or lacking social skills, increase in behavioral problems, including truancy, violence, and defiance, not to mention an increased risk of suicide. Again, both the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Virginia Department of Education highlight concerns for extended time without in-person learning and the longer lasting impact this will have on children's lives. Already, studies are showing since March, many hundreds of thousands of children are at higher risk for substance abuse, teenage pregnancy, high school dropping out, falling behind in reading, math, writing, science at levels which will be difficult to catch up. In just a few months, there are substantially more children and adolescents being diagnosed with anxiety, depression, adjustment and conduct disorders, all directly due to this crisis and the lack of support through the school system. Recent UNICEF publication on the impact of COVID on education and mental health outcomes. I have no doubt the results of Lexington City's school board's rash decision will be more detrimental to our youth than the fear of COVID, which led to this decision. I have participated in hours of webinars and supervisions each week within the counseling community, all of which have been focused on children and families. The number one concern voiced is the impact referenced above. Within our field, we have decided and agreed the ethical decision is to serve families of young children in person, if at all feasible. There are ways to make this safe. Although it has taken more time, effort, and communication, I have seen it as possible and witnessed the benefits this has had on the children and families in our community. If I were to track the impact of the pandemic in our community on youth, it highlights after the first 3 months as the most challenging due to the continued lack of face-to-face social engagement with peers in the community. Once this summer, there were more opportunities for safely to be with same-aged peers, I witnessed noticeable positive shifts and improvements in mental health, sleep, eating, relationships, happiness, and overall well-being. This has been echoed by a significant number of therapists in Virginia who have seen those changes in their own practices when children have been able to creatively and healthily reconnect with peers in their community. For the specific reasons I was given, K-3 would be virtual, were based on anxiety and assumptions of what could not work instead of what has been proven in our community during safe and successful summer camps. 1, students would struggle with social distancing at these ages. A, while yes, some students would have trouble with keeping distance, with proper supervision and reminders, they will catch on. If there are a select few struggling with this, it could be addressed more in depth with those individuals and strategies put in place to mitigate and help them. If it is still problematic, then it could be recommended those children have a smaller group environment. 2, students would struggle with our mask policy at these ages. A, I have seen children everywhere wearing masks. As young as 3 are able to keep them on for extended periods of time. This might require a transition period as the spatial distance would, but they would get the hang of it and surprise the adults with how they can comply. Our son had been adamantly against masks. It took a few days with reminders and helping him understand the reasons, as well as trying a few styles out. And within the first week at the YMCA camp, he was putting it on without a reminder. Once he understood that wearing it meant he was going to be with his friends, he was on board and very compliant. 3, students would struggle to sit in the same place for long periods of time. A, there is no need for the revised spatial distancing to involve sitting in the same place for long periods of time. Creative thinking and minimal effort could make students work independently and separately, but not only sitting down. Earth Song successfully implements this with children as young as 2. My understanding of the in-person plan also included as much outside learning time and experiences as possible. I rejoiced at this because it is needed already within our school system. This in and of itself would solve some of the given concerns related to distance and mask wearing. 4, opening in person is not the safest available option at this time for students and staff. A, while in some communities it is clearly safer to be virtual, we do not live in one of those. There is an opportunity right now to show how in-person education can be successful. To be an example of using logic and concern for mental health well-being when talking about what is safest for our youth. If it isn't safe now to have our children in the schools, when will it be? If this is the current criteria, then it will be this way for much longer than this school year. 5, specialists voiced concern with exposure during any given day as they travel to each grade level. If specialists are concerned about their safety, would there not be a way they could meet virtually instead of going into classrooms? They could also meet outside or in smaller groups or a separate space. Furthermore, it is only a small percentage of students who receive special education services, and often those are individual. Those are necessary, but the other specials, while valuable, but not necessary, and could be creatively incorporated in other aspects of the day without need for extra exposure by those teachers. As the YMCA and Woods Creek summer programs proved, it is possible to have a safe and enriching experience with this age group and even younger. Recently, they have even modeled how a positive case does not necessarily lead to transmission. They acted according to their protocol, VDH guidance, and were able to quickly follow steps to keep the entire school and staff safe. They are examples of how to navigate the challenges and concerns on a level beyond fear-based avoidance. AAP outlines how concerns with COVID related to young children are less severe and less likely to lead to widespread transmission than adults. Their guidance states, although children and adolescents play a major role in amplifying influenza outbreaks, to date, this does not appear to be the case with SARS coronavirus 2. Although many questions remain, the preponderance of evidence indicates that children and adolescents can become infected and are less likely to be symptomatic and less likely to have severe disease resulting from SARS coronavirus 2 infection. We continue to learn more about the role children play in transmission of SARS coronavirus 2, period. At present, it appears that children younger than 10 years may be less likely to become infected and less likely to spread infection to others. The AAP guidance concludes, finally, policymakers and school administrators should acknowledge that COVID-19 policies are intended to mitigate, not eliminate, risk. No single action or set of actions will completely eliminate the risk of SARS coronavirus 2 transmission, but implementation of several coordinated interventions can greatly reduce the risk. Even in these communities, though, in-person learning should still be the goal and may be feasible as the epidemiology improves. Countries that have been able to successfully open schools have had low rates of community SARS coronavirus 2 circulation. A publication by the Public Health Agency of Sweden proved from direct experience and data that keeping schools open during the pandemic was safe for children, families, staff, and their communities. They chose to keep pre-K and primary schools open in March and never closed. They did so because they prioritized social, emotional well-being and mental health, recognizing the extreme damages that could transpire from extended closings. Their data proved there was no increased risk of transmission rate than Finland, who closed schools mid-March. Primary school closure and reopening did not have any significant impact on the weekly number of laboratory-confirmed cases in primary school-age children. Furthermore, comparison of cases with staff in schools to other professions did not show any increased risk for teachers. They concluded that the closing of schools had no measurable effect on the number of cases of COVID-19 among children. Citation of a website. Learning is so much more than the academic regurgitation of material, and while it sounds like the teachers are working hard to be more engaging than we saw in the spring, many students will not experience the varied aspects of learning they need. The physical interaction with others in a shared environment is a key piece of the brain assimilating information, particularly for the younger grades. There is really no way to properly simulate this virtually. I imagine many students will quickly grow to hate learning, which at all ages, the joy of learning is important, but particularly at the foundational pre-K and elementary levels. At the current very low health risk state of our community, parents should be the ones to determine if they want virtual or in-person. It is insulting to say to parents after they are overwhelmingly committed to the in-person option that the school is making the safest decision. What was the point of the survey if it was going to be completely dismissed 1 week before school is starting? While I respect each individual parent and family decision as they weigh the impact on physical health as well as mental and emotional health, I do not agree with the current stance the school board has taken. For all these reasons, we are not going to have our son partake in virtual learning. It will not be healthy or beneficial to him, even with the best teacher at the best school. The last-minute decision by Lexington City Schools has put us in a tough position with opportunities that would have been available earlier in the month now full. In making a last-minute decision on behalf of a few, the school board has put hundreds of families in a highly stressful position. I directly asked in June and July about the likelihood of in-person school for my first grader. Both times I was reassured that if Virginia were in phase 2 or 3, we would have some school in person. I trusted this and therefore continued to pay tuition for enrollment and did not make other plans. I felt confident and safe in committing to send my child to Waddell in person. The justifications I have been given for this sudden change to virtual are not enough. It is not fair to our younger students or parents to not attempt a plan which could work for them. If a larger school system with an elementary school 1 mile from Waddell can have a plan in place, why can't Waddell? The valuable resources the Lexington City Schools is privileged and lucky to have are not being best used. As a tuition payer, future taxpayer, and parent, I request a proper legal and ethical process be put in place to either overturn or revise this decision at a minimum for K through 3 students. There must be a compromise or modification which could be put in place where those teachers who are concerned could be heard and supported, yet 500 students and their families would not suffer. It seems there was a waste of taxpayer and city funds for the administration and teachers to spend all summer planning for hybrid education so that the week before and force them to change. If the safety concerns were valid and actually emergent as parents we would understand. But given that that is not the case, we would like to hold the school board accountable for their choices and actions. I'm happy to speak directly with any city council member. Thank you for your time and thank you for your effort to support our children and families. Katie Macy.
From Patrick Ramey. Thank you for taking the time to voice and listen to the concerns of community members. While many have already addressed the inappropriateness of the school shutdown of in-person instruction given available COVID data, I am writing to express my concern that by moving our community's children online at the last minute, the school board has actually made our city less safe in the event of a local increase in COVID cases. Parents that were planning on their children being in school on August 31st were suddenly, with only 1 week's notice, forced to balance work schedules against ensuring a quality education for their children. The result, in many cases, is a series of childcare arrangements that vary daily: daycare, private education, small groups hosted by families, and playdates. Thankfully, the community is coming together to fill the void left by our school board's negligence. However, due to the necessary patchwork of group opportunities that characterize each child's weekly experience, many will be exposed to a wider population of both other children and adults during a normal week than they would have been if limited to their class at Lilburn or Waddell. That means that in the event of an outbreak, to the extent children transmit the virus by moving between different groups and daycare options on a daily basis, an infected child will come into contact with far more people than they would have if they were at school. The school board's original plan for in-person instruction mitigated the risk of COVID-19 transmission through safety measures. Each child situated within their class with a fixed group of peers helps to limit the potential for broad transmission. Woods Creek Montessori provides an excellent example of this process in practice. A child was diagnosed with COVID. The classroom was briefly quarantined. The child has since recovered without others infected, and everything is back to normal. School provides structure that limits virus spread by restricting the number of contacts and easing the burden of contact tracing. Now, however, due to the school board's negligent last-minute decision, children in our community will be moving between makeshift educational arrangements daily, coming into contact with many different groups. Thankfully, current cases remain low. However, in the event of a local outbreak, this situation made necessary by the superintendent and the school board's failure to make everyone in our community less safe than if school had proceeded as originally planned. The school board and superintendent have placed everyone in this community at a greater risk through their thoughtless actions. Best for Lexington, Patrick Ramey, 110 White Street.
A letter from Janice Begares. Like school personnel across the country, the Lexington City Schools teachers and staff had many conversations over the past several weeks. Many common themes have emerged from these discussions. Uncertainty, fear, and confusion have, of course, been a large part of those conversations. However, the most powerful and overwhelming themes to emerge have been ones of optimism, enthusiasm, determination, and gratitude. Ask any teacher what he likes most about teaching, and the answer you will hear is the children. They are unquestionably the best part of the profession. We were excited about being back in the classroom with our students. We've missed seeing their smiles and hearing their laughter in our buildings. We are public school educators. We would all choose to teach in person. That is who we are. As the beginning of the school year approached, our concern for the health of our colleagues and students grew. We wanted our students back in the classroom, but not at the cost of anyone's health. Many of those on our staff have underlying health conditions or are in close contact with someone who does. Would we be able to protect our students, ourselves, and our loved ones? The pressures of adapting the curriculum, planning for a wide variety of learning approaches, trying to master all of the new tools we would need, and worrying about the serious health issues involved was at times overwhelming. As each day passed, it seemed to be less likely we would be able to balance all of those with integrity. We wanted to do right by our students, but often there was no clear answer on what that might be. The administration sought our input, and members of the faculty and staff expressed their concerns and uncertainty. Those thoughts were shared with the school board, who weighed our views, along with the science and guidance and commonality across the Commonwealth when making their decisions. We knew that under the current circumstances, there were no right or wrong choices, only difficult ones. The faculty and staff overwhelmingly support our administration and school board in their decision and for facing their responsibilities with courage, compassion, and wisdom. Now it is time for us to move forward. The Lexington City Schools faculty and staff will do what educators everywhere do on a daily basis. We will work together to give our children the education they deserve. We will take into account their educational, social, and emotional needs and help them grow as learners and people. And in that way, these times are no different than any others we have faced in education. And we will do all of this with the support of our administration and school board. Our schools have always benefited from the partnerships with our parents and community. You have generously given of your time, experience, and effort to create a strong learning environment for our students. We are truly grateful for all that you do and need your support now more than ever. There is responsibility on all of us to be sure our learners keep learning, families, teachers, community. Working together, we will ensure that our children have a great education. Stronger Together, submitted by Janice Begares, first grade, teacher, Waddell Elementary School, signed by 32 members of the Waddell Elementary faculty and staff.
Thank you all for reading those into the record, and thank you to the folks that sent those communications to council. Greatly appreciate it. Janie, are there any other comments or folks in the queue?
That's all I had.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We will move on to the next item, which is the consent agenda and request for closure for the Stonewall Brigade Camp Sons of Confederate Veterans in order to host a memorial service and parade. Request by City of Lexington General Registrar for one-way traffic in order for officers of election to process curbside voters on both sides of the street, and to accept the fiscal year 20 fourth quarter financial report. And I would ask for council's consideration.
Move to approve consent agenda.
Thank you, Chuck.
Second.
And Leslie with the second. A roll call vote. Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. And I encourage all of the public as we rapidly approach the election. I know there's a big crew that's supporting the registrar this year, and it's going to be a much different process than we've ever experienced before, given COVID in particular, and with this change for the one-way traffic. Drive-by voting will, I hope, will be a resounding success. Makes it tough for the candidates trying to greet voters as they're coming and going, but again, challenges that we have to deal with.
But it's, it's very easy this year to vote ahead of time. You can mail in your ballot or drop it off at City Hall after September 18th, because it will take longer to do the drive-through, though that's a very safe way, and I'm impressed they're doing it. But there's many options to vote to make sure that everybody can vote.
Absolutely. Or in the Chicago fashion, vote early and often. Next item of business is unfinished business, an update and report on the Sarah's Run Interceptor and perhaps sewer jets. Just kidding.
Mr. Mayor, council members, we've delayed this on a number of occasions because Jeff Martone was not able to be with us. But tonight he is with us and can give you a detailed accounting on the issues, activities that have occurred in order to provide data and information on where we stand with Sarah's Run Interceptor. So I'm just going to turn this over to Jeff Martone, and between himself and what little I can contribute, we can answer any questions I'm sure that council will have. Jeff?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jim. I apologize to council. I coughed up for a better Exceed internet plan today and got a new router, and everything was beta testing fine until about 7:58, right before the session started. I know Jim has briefed you in the past on the Sayers Run capacity analysis, but in recap, Civil Consulting Group finished their infiltration, inflow, and hydraulic capacity analysis of the Sayers Run sewer shed in April. And fundamentally, they recommended no additional development within the shed unless two things occurred. One is that the city reduced I&I within the sewer shed, and two, we improved the capacity of the interceptor itself, which is basically saying we increased the size of the pipe. As a reminder, this report estimated that groundwater infiltration account for approximately 50 to 65% of dry weather system flows. Additionally, when stormwater intrusion during wet weather events caused these dry weather flows to peak by as much as 970%, which is pretty significant. So to illustrate the magnitude of this, there were five hot flow dart sewer monitors installed during the study period. The fifth one, or most downstream one, was by Waddell Elementary, basically at the confluence of the Sayers Run sewer shed and the Woods Creek interceptor. So I highlighted some of the flow data just for that 1 meter because in essence that captured the whole shed itself. So during the study period, the peak domestic water use for that system was 67 GPM. Peak dry weather metered flows, sewer metered flows, were 180 GPM. But when we had significant rainfall events, the peak wet weather metered flow jumped to 1,742 GPM. So that's a pretty significant increase. As part of this study, they also ran a hydraulic grade line capacity analysis for the system. And as a reminder, this is a prediction of the water surface elevation within the pipes when we reference the hydraulic grade line. There's a couple scenarios modeled, but the foundation of the report was predicated on existing dry weather flows within the system, existing wet weather flows within the system, and then looking ahead to the worst case, when we have wet weather flows plus an allotment of 100 GPM for development of the VDOT property. I think you should find attached some appendices from the report which profile the predicted grade lines or water surface elevations for these three events. You'll note that dry weather flows are contained within the pipe, so they're flowing freely. But when you look at existing wet weather flows, they're predicted to surcharge fundamentally from the intersection of Sellers and Jackson to the intersection of Thornhill Road and Welsh Park, and a lot of that's attributed at the pipe size goes from 12 to 8 at the intersection of Sellers and Jackson, so that's why you see the grade line increase dramatically there. So, of course, when you add the 100 GPM that was allotted to the proposed development VDOT, that really made these grade lines jump up significantly. Existing, they were just 2 to 5 feet above, or predicted to be above some low-lying manholes, but this jumps up to, you'd have to look at the scale on the side, but easily 10 to 15 feet above these same structures. So it's a fairly significant increase. I would just as a reminder, sound engineering practice, in order to get your plans approved by the health department, you would need to show when you're planning a new development that your peak flows are flowing by gravity, not under pressure flow. So in other words, no surcharging in your manholes for them to be approved. So basically the system right now during wet weather events is performing suboptimally, and this will be confounded when you add additional flows to that. Now I'd like to add that, again, the current model and study is probably conservative. Flow projections for the development could be conservative too, but there is possible during significant rainfall events, and if during peak usage, whatever development goes on there, if everybody's, you know, if it's the time of day everybody's taking a shower, whether it's morning or an afternoon, that you could possibly have some of the surcharging as indicated by the report. Jumping ahead, as far as what we've done as a city for I&I reduction efforts, the last week of July, Public Works did smoke testing of virtually all of the Sayers Run sewer shed. We logged approximately 30 areas of interest, basically where we saw smoke emanating from the ground. We took photographs. We put them into our GIS system. So basically, we can snap on an icon, see what the photograph was, and kind of deduct what the issue is. Of these 30, I kind of made up my own categories here, so you have to bear with me. Two locations could be attributed to roof drain cross connections with their sanitary system. I believe we found Harrison's Funeral Home, and I forget the address, but one home off the end of Arpia Street, we could see smoke emanating from their roof leaders. Some of the other ones, I think 12 of them were pretty simple repairs. I can't say they're significant contributors during intrusion or rainfall events. But these would be like clean out tops have been mowed over by lawnmowers, and some manhole rims needed resealing. I would note that some of these, the clean out itself is well above grade, so even though the top's off, I'm not going to sit here and tell council that a wealth of stormwater is coming to the majority of these. I think we found 10 are estimated to be sewer pipe point repairs, basically either cracked or broken or separated pipe joints. Again, we won't really know that till we dig into the ground. And then three areas we found actually smoke emanating from cross connects with storm drainage systems, and I don't mean literally cross connections, but what my opinion would be that we'd have storm sewers that, you know, a lot of them are corrugated metal, probably the bottom's rotted out, and it's probably over an old terracotta sewer line, so it's probably enabling stormwater flowing through the storm sewer to penetrate the ground, and of course get into our sanitary sewer. And then lastly, and most significantly, we found 3 locations which totaled about 1,250 linear feet of where the whole sewer line, almost every 4 feet, there was smoke billowing out of the ground. So these lines would need to be replaced. The majority of that, you know, probably 1,000 foot of that was at the address of 203 Ross Road. That was where this location, a lot of the main, actually 2 mains coming from the older Jackson neighborhood, that's where they tie into the Sayers Run interceptor. And these pipes are terracotta, so basically every 4 foot you have a joint, every 4 foot you're seeing smoke emanate from the ground. We're still working on some design resolutions and estimates for this work. Some of them we won't be able to estimate until we actually maybe dig down and see what the nature of the repair is. I would like to install the city's flow wave ultrasonic sewer meter. Basically, again, where meter number 5 was, or adjacent to Waddell School. I'm sure that we're not going to get the exact same flows because we're not as high-tech as the Doppler meters that were employed for this report. But I'd like to get them in place for a couple months so we get a baseline of what our average dry weather flows and some of our peak flows during rainfall events are. So we have some indication of what improvements we are doing with our I&I through some of our repair efforts. The last paragraph is somewhat outdated. I highlighted that the previous repair estimate James gave you to upsize the interceptor from 8 to 12 was a little north of $2 million, and if we left it as it is but decided to bolt down and put backflow preventers on some of the impacted sewer laterals coming from the homes, it would be just shy of $30,000. I also recommended that we asked the developer to provide his best guess projection for anticipated peak flows from the new development. And these were provided to us since the writing of this agenda item, and I think their projection was 115 GPM. So our original estimate from 6 months ago was pretty close. And with that, I'd open up to any questions council has.
Members of council, what questions do you have?
Hey, Jeff, I have a question. Of the 30 or so problem areas that you potential problem areas that you identified, if you know, can we make a reasonable assumption that if we track down these things and repaired what could be repaired, that we would save 100 gallons per minute during wet weather conditions? I mean, that's what I'm trying to figure out, because I mean, 100 gallons per minute is kind of a drop in the bucket compared to the 1,742 that you say is going through the system now during wet weather conditions. Is that right?
Yes, sir. And I would agree with that, and I understand the question. Intuitively, I would say, you know, for the record, yes, I think if we addressed all these, then yes, we'd probably get 100 GPM out of the system. But, you know, I reserve the right to be wrong when we put all these meters in place and actually try to put some science behind that estimate. But yes, I would think that yeah, we can get 100 GPM.
So conceivably, if we made what repairs we could, we could see what kind of savings we could get out of I&I there. Would that sort of reduce the need to replace the Sarah's Run interceptor, assuming best case scenario we can save 100 gallons per minute?
Well, to answer that, yes. If we got 100 GPM out, then, you know, yes, we can accommodate the development. But then I guess fundamentally we have to look ahead as how much development do we want on that system, because, you know, at some point, and if we go beyond this VDOT property, and I don't really know what's out there, but, you know, at some point in time we may well have to upsize the Sarah's Run interceptor. I mean, we just recently upsized the Woods Creek interceptor for about 1,600 feet.
Yeah, because we're having surcharging now during storms. Does that happen very frequently?
I don't know the frequency, to be honest, Leslie. I just know that during the surveys, that when we were actually taking invert readings of all the structures in the study area, there was, you know, definite evidence that they were surcharging at or near rim elevation. As far as frequency, you know, I'd have to sit out there during a rainfall event to really tell you that. But intuitively, I would say, just shooting from the hip, that if we got over a 1-inch rainfall event, then I'd say, yeah, we're getting surcharging happening.
Because I'm just sort of wondering, from the report, I'm interpreting it somewhat as we need to replace that interceptor regardless, even if we don't do any development projects. That probably the I&I won't get it enough, and that there's so many issues. Is that an overstatement? If we don't do development, do you feel like this line, the interceptor, still needs to be replaced in the near future?
To answer that, we'd have to talk about time horizon of expectations, because, you know, currently we're looking to, you know, basically every other year do significant water and sewer improvements to various neighborhoods. So if we had 30 years to do it, then I would say, yeah, we probably, with just simple replacements each neighborhood, we'd probably get almost all the I&I out. But if that's not the horizon, and we got to confine that to a more near horizon, say a couple of years, then potentially, yes, your statement is correct. We'd probably have to upsize the interceptor.
And right now you have some work, and I think Diamond Hill that has priority, or at least is coming sooner on our CIP.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
I still think that's that work, even though in what you know about this interceptor, again, assuming we don't do any development, that we need to focus on the Diamond Hill project, or how do these compare?
Diamond Hill is still under design. Original design was based off estimates from 2015, which, if we just rule out the water's pretty simple replacement. We look at sewer replacement. A lot of those were predicated on lining that system. I also had the consultant that said, well, give me, if we made the sewer system more conforming and otherwise, could we get a lot of it out to the street, not so much in backyards? Could we get it at least where it followed common property lines to make easement acquisition a little bit easier? So they did all that, and they ran the analysis, and it was probably 3 times the original budget for that project. So we've gone back to the drawing board. You'll probably see that we have contractors out now doing more video inspection and cleaning of the mains in that area, and just giving us more intelligence. If we drop back to our original estimate of trying to line these, are they lineable? So whether one's more important than the other, that's a hard question to answer. They're going to 2 separate sheds, so what we're doing now or improving in the near future would not be bettering anything in the Sayers Run interceptor. If it was council's wish, I mean, we can have the plans all buttoned up 100% and put them on the shelf and move to other projects. It'd be hard to prioritize, Leslie, what is more important.
Okay. Well, that's helpful to know.
Basically, our first 3, if you look at the Diamond Hill and Jackson Phase 1 and Jackson Phase 2, they're basically predicated in priority on age of both water and sewer in those areas. So it kind of goes back to kind of the chicken and egg as far as looking ahead at the Sayers Run system. If we stick to the plan, it depends on your time expectations, and we get all this old terracotta pipe out of our system, whether we either line it or preferably replace it, then we're kind of, killing 2 birds with, 1 stone. But again, that's a long time horizon, and it probably won't accommodate, development of the VDOT probably the next couple of years.
Thank you.
Jeff, Frank here. Clearly, there's plenty of capacity for any development at the sewer plant, so we don't have any issues there, correct?
I would let Jordan speak to that. I would say that there probably are issues during rainfall events.
Okay.
At the meetings I've attended, during significant rain events, especially like we had 2 falls ago, they were, literally busting at the seams, just because the I&I overwhelmed their system. So they're treating rainwater instead of, wastewater, more or less. So I don't know if that answers the question, do they have the capacity? I think without the I&I issues that we have that's causing their problems, they do have the capacity. So the question I have for Jeff, when I'm looking at the peak water use and what we're getting through the sewer at dry and wet weather conditions, is this something that the state starts to look at and consider our system substandard, and is that something we need to be taking into consideration as we look forward or look at the Sayers Run sewer drainage?
I would say, Chuck, that ultimately, as far as you're looking at dealing with a lot of I&I, the state would probably look at it at the MSA's end. As far as the city's end, what they would look at is our reportable overflows, and thankfully we only have, maybe report 1 or 2 a year. So if you start reporting, and I don't know what the number is, Chuck, but if you start having a significant trend upwards, then I would assure you that DEQ would be taking a hard look at us and maybe having, one day getting a consent order to do needed repairs. But I don't really know what that number is. But right now, since I've been here at the city, we average about 1 or 2 a year. So and I'll say that we're not on their radar, is my opinion. And I would also like to go back to you, Mr. Mayor. I would highlight what Chuck said. Since I've been with the city, I've been copied daily on MSA's flume readings for our sewer flow before it enters their system. And our average day flows, I mean, they fluctuate, but they're somewhere between 0.5 and maybe 0.65 million gallons a day. We might have peaks during a day that reach a million gallons a day flow rate. That's typically when our Campbell Lane pump station kicks on. A lot of times when we have, say, ½ inch to maybe up to an inch rainfall events, if you look at those hydrographs or their meter charts, we might get up to a peak of 2 to 3 million gallon a day flow. But when we get serious rain events, 2 inch or more, the chart caps out at 6 million gallons a day. That's the highest it will read. But if you extrapolated the hydrograph or the flow curve, we easily, as a city, reach 8 million gallons a day at certain peak flows. So I would say yes, during peak rain events, the plant is stressed. And that also speaks to the point that, I know we're just looking at the Sayers Run shed, but, endemically as a city, when our sewers combined is going to the MSA system, we have huge peaks when it rains.
Well, certainly if we're able to find a developer for the VDOT property and move forward on that, new customers would support the cash flow for upgrades for the entire system. So sharing that cost along the way from a developmental standpoint.
Yes, sir. And I'm not here to scare everybody off by any means. I do think that, it's the perfect storm when you have a peak discharge from the proposed development, whatever it is, and we have very large rain events, then we have the potential to surcharge as predicted in the report. Now, we can remedy that, as Jim has already told you before, by bolting down manholes, putting backflow preventers on any low-lying laterals or homes that are low-lying or, have basements contributing to the system. And that can be remedied. That's not a perfect option, but we could probably, control any overflows.
And do I recall you said that was probably a 30,000 expense?
That was my estimate. If you look at that zone, the number of manholes, and I tried to count, again, till you really survey it, Mr. Mayor, it's hard to estimate, but I tried to look at all the laterals and the manholes that we would either have to bolt down or put backflow preventers on between the intersections of Jackson and Sellers and then Thornhill and Welsh Park. And that's where I got that estimate.
To go along with that, if I may, and Councilmember Smith and Ayers, I think we're trying to get to this point. If we were to put some significant, and I don't know what dollar figure that would be, but some significant investment on trying to mitigate the I&I, we could probably put enough capacity or recover enough capacity that potentially with bolting down the manholes and putting in the backflow preventers, we'd be in a better situation than we are now, even with the flows we might see from a development. As Jeff said, you can't predict that numerically, but there's a gut feeling that, if we do enough work, we're going to get close to that. And even when we're in dry weather flows, we're saving money on our sewer expenses because we don't have that rainwater going into into our system that is being treated and we're being charged for. So there's some logic to looking at that and possibility that that's a way forward short term.
Jeff, can I ask if we do work on the Sayers Run interceptor, how long a project would that be? I mean, would that take a year? I mean, how long would it take?
Oh, I think my previous projection, you're probably going to be a year in survey, design, and permitting. Because again, I mean, the pipe itself, just like most of our pipes, is crisscrossing Sayers Run. I do believe that's a jurisdictional water, so it'll be quite a bit of permitting. And then probably a year of construction, if we really get into rock as we experienced in Woods Creek, and I really don't know what the rock projections are that through that vicinity without survey. But, you know, it might go longer than a year construction. So you know, from start to finish, I would say 0 to 2 years or maybe 2.5 years would be your timeline.
Got it. And then I guess my other question is tracking down, you know, the potential problem spots that you identified, those 30 things. How long do you think it would take to kind of run those things through and explore the savings you could possibly get out of that? And do you have in your budget the funds to track that down?
I believe I do. Jake and I can get together and see what's left in the I&I account. I know that we funded this report through the account. I think we have just about $300,000 left. If we do all the repairs or repair these 30 areas just with our own staff, then we'll be well below that number. But I would have to run an estimate for doing it in-house, but we would not exceed that amount. So yes, we have the funds now. As far as timeline, I would still like to get our meter deployed. Right now we've sent it off just to make sure the ultrasonic sensors are functioning properly before we hang our hats on it. Hopefully it's back next week. If not, we have other redundant meters, but I would like to get the meter in place next week and get some baseline flows, readings, and I'm sure we'll get some rainfall events with the trends we're in now for about a 2-month period. In that time, I can get better estimates on doing this work in-house. But as far as doing the work after that 2-month period, I would say add another 2 months and we probably mop up everything that's on the list before you.
Just to confirm what Jeff said, as part of our carryovers approved earlier this evening, we did have just shy of $300,000 for I&I projects in the utility fund.
Thank you, Jake.
And MSA isn't contributing any assistance for fixing our I&I anymore, are they? I think they eliminated that or removed it from their budget last year. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chuck. I believe it was for this fiscal year, and I thought they also estimated next fiscal year that would be the trend as well.
Good times. But Jeff, thank you for that update. Any other questions from council?
I just want to thank Jeff for all his work on this. We are so lucky to have you, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Jeff, we had you on the agenda for a couple times, and circumstances beyond control prevented you from being there. And I'm sure I speak for the entire council and our condolences on your father's passing, but we're grateful for the work that you and your team do for our city and for our entire community. So thank you. And maybe you can work with Dennis to organize the sewer jet ride and see how that thing works.
We can do that.
Sort of like a police ride along, I guess, you know, same idea.
Exactly.
Can accommodate it.
Not really.
Be careful what you ask for, Dennis.
That's right. Any other questions for Jeff? Jeff, while you're with us, yeah, no need for you to stay, and at least from my perspective, but before you go, Main Street in downtown Lexington looks amazing. We were delayed with the striping due to the tragic accident of the vendor who had his equipment torn up and employees injured out on the interstate, but have had people stop me, and I'm sure other council members have as well, thanking for the smooth sailing down Main Street. It looks fantastic and very grateful. It coincides with the start of and return of the students for the two universities, and although it's virtual, the start of our public schools, and things are just spit, shine, and polish for this great Labor Day weekend. So thanks to you and your crew for getting that to the finish line. Greatly appreciate it.
Yes, sir, thank you. They probably have one more night to wrap it up, and if we can ever get where there's not rain predicted, we'll make that happen. Just as a reminder, they will resume our paving program starting tomorrow, and that will be on Moore Street and Taylor Street.
Terrific. Thank you so much for all you do for us.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
does council want to digest this information a little bit more, or is there anything you would like staff and I to further explore after what you heard this evening?
My sense is probably want to chew a little bit on it, and I feel like Jeff, I heard him wanting to do a little more firming up of numbers and research before making a recommendation. Is my sense. I'd ask for council's thoughts if that doesn't coincide with what you're thinking.
I think that sounds good. I think, yeah, sounds like we'll probably head the direction of fixing the 30 problems identified. So yeah, to get more information on that.
Right. Very good. Got what
Thank
you
you.
need, Jim? Excellent. Moving along, our next part of the agenda, reports and communications, boards and commissions. Blue Ridge Resource Authority.
No report, but we're having an advisory committee meeting tomorrow. I'll report back to council if there's anything of significant development as a result of that.
Thank you, Chuck. Main Street Lexington.
We're actually meeting next Tuesday, but just a couple of reminders. The sidewalk sale is this weekend, so head downtown and see what buys you can find. In the Science Festival Maker Fair, it'll be different this year. They're going to make to-go bags that can pick up projects to do at home, and those will be available October 1st and 2nd, and I'll give you more details at the next meeting. And welcome to new businesses in town, downtown. We have Meta Meals and Mulberry DIY Workshop have opened downtown, so go by and visit those. And remember, if you're looking for a gift idea, that the LiftLex gift card program is going on, so you can stop by and get some gift cards. That's all I have.
Thank you, Leslie. Any questions for Leslie? Should have beautiful weather and wonderful options on the sidewalk, and feel free to walk into the stores and spread your wealth in there with getting fun plans. Halloween's just around the corner, and probably some birthdays. Planning Commission.
We met last Thursday and we had a presentation from LPDA on the Jordans Point Park Master Plan. Bill Melchek presented that, and it was very well received, and we had some good discussions on that. And I think that presentation will come to council in a work session. I can't remember if it's our next meeting or one following that. And then again, this coming Thursday, a week from today, we have our public hearing on the comprehensive plan, and that'll be at 5 o'clock on Zoom. And that the plan is available on the city website for review. And then once it is adopted by the Planning Commission, it will move on to council. And so we'll need to get an idea of what council would like to see in the form of a work session and a presentation on the plan.
As we've discussed before, I think there's merit to having a joint meeting with the Planning Commission, ostensibly for them to present the comprehensive plan to council and to discuss some of the finer points. But that would fall after we've had received a copy of the comp plan that you've adopted and sifted through it. It's a meaty document, of course. And then after the work session, joint meeting with the planning, would like to, at the subsequent city council meeting, have it on the agenda for public hearing and adoption if at all possible, and have that in place late October, early November if possible. Any other questions for Leslie and the Planning Commission? Very good. Regional Tourism Board.
Yeah, we won't meet again until Wednesday, September 16th, but there's two things I did want to mention. First off, there will be Labor Day fireworks at Glen Maury Park, and that is Monday, September 7th at from 9 to 9:30 p.m. And there will be food trucks there, and so you can go pitch a blanket and socially distance and enjoy some Labor Day fireworks. And the other thing is the Rotary Club's Leprechaun Leap, which got postponed from March, is actually taking place September 25th through the 27th. It's virtual, so you can register online at the Run Sign Up site. And if you just Google Leprechaun Leap Lexington, it'll pull it up. And registration is $25, and proceeds will go to the Rockbridge Christmas Basket Program. And that's all I got tonight.
And did I hear you correctly? That's a 3-day event?
Well, it's actually, you register and then you have 3 days basically to complete the 5K race. And so you follow the trail and then you report your results at the website, and then they get winners. So you kind of self-report how you do.
Terrific. I was just envisioning a 3-day, that's quite a leap.
Pretty slow pace.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Rockbridge Area Department of Social Services.
I have no report.
Thank you, Michelle. Raro, Mr. Ziegler.
We met yesterday, and I don't have a huge report, but we are continuing to put some clinics on. So if kids are interested in softball, baseball, there's been some clinics at Brubaker and Foxfield. Also, we're going to have some soccer clinics. And as I understand it, we're also going to have sort of some like agility clinics if kids aren't necessarily into playing soccer or softball or baseball. Also, something that's kind of neat is we were able to put together a couple of teams actually, and they're playing in some fall leagues up in South Augusta. So we've got some kids, 11, 12-year-olds or so on that South Augusta let us put a team up there because South Augusta has continued to play baseball throughout the summer. And so we've got to have a group up there. We continue to take care of the fields because obviously Raro takes care of a lot of fields that may be used by Rockbridge United if they're utilizing them, or if Lexington Lacrosse also. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, David. Threshold.
No report.
Oh my. CARES Committee, Mr. Ziegler or Leslie or Jim.
On me. So we met today. We've been trading numerous emails. We met today, and I sent a kind of a read ahead email, and that we're now moving on to the second CARES Act appropriation. That's $649,635, which is the same amount that we received a few months ago. And so as we still wrap our mind around the asks or the needs of both the city and our regional, the agencies that we partner with the county and Buena Vista to fund. And so that could be that we're going to eventually come back to city council to say we need dollars to help with the jail, or with, it might be the MSA or the landfill or 911, any number. What we have decided is that we have some immediate needs that we would like to get some direction from council tonight so that we can get on with spending those dollars to help a few functions within the city. And so in consultation with the school leadership, they have pressing needs that total about $37,000 that they could use access to that money now. And so that would entail money for virtual learning software of about $10,000, about $22,000 for additional tech devices for staff and teachers, and then about $5,000 to enhance or to activate outside wireless sort of public hotspots. that they've been evaluating that they believe can enhance the area around their schools. And so in total, that's about $37,000. As we go on in the fall, I suspect there could be more requests from the school, but this is what we know right now, that they agree with us, or they put forward these requests as being immediate needs. Also, something that we believe is an immediate need that doesn't need to wait is that the police department has identified some improvements to their lobby area that can be, certainly for purposes of keeping officers and staff safe from any potential COVID-19 contamination if someone were to come in, but also just safety and security. And so we have varying estimates on how much that project could cost, but we don't believe that it would exceed $10,000. And so we would like to give Jim and staff access to that money to get that project started. And then lastly, you may recall that we did fund some nonprofits, that we allocated money to the Community Foundation for them to evaluate some nonprofit applications from nonprofits that do significant work in Lexington. And so they had received in the first round of our allocations about, what was it, about $64,000 or $65,000. And they received requests that exceeded that by about $25,000 or $26,000. And what our small committee what we would like to bring forth to council is we would like to allocate enough money to the Community Foundation so that they can meet the needs of each of those applications, so that each of those requests, if they meet the proper criteria, that they can be funded rather than partially funding some of those requests. And so we would like to allocate $26,000, up to $26,000 to give Jim and Jake the ability to allocate that money. What we can fall back on a little bit is that we have $9,000 of unused money from the first round of CARES Act dollars. So instead of coming tonight and saying we're asking for a total of $73, it's more of about spending $9 from the first round and then $64,000 roughly potentially out of the second round of funding. That will still leave us with almost $580,000 that we still have plans for, but we want to work and get a little bit further into the fall to see how the city, the community are handling the crisis, the pandemic, our schools and so on, our businesses. But right now we want to make that proposal to you all, and we can answer any questions. Jake and Jim have been obviously all on top of this, and they can answer any questions if Leslie and I cannot.
Thank you, David. Members of council, do you have any questions of the recommendation that David and Leslie and staff have put together?
Sorry, it just seems like a very sensible recommendation. I think it's good.
Thank you, Dennis. Chuck?
The 26,000 going to the Community Foundation, that's to supplement the original 65 that didn't cover the requests. Am I reading that right?
Yes, correct.
Community Foundation's money is, I guess it's Rockbridge County and ours, correct? So they're taking all those funds, the applications that are going to the foundation. Is it like the money's coming from one big pot, or is our money one separate pot of money and then Rockbridge County's is another pot of money?
My understanding from meeting with Lori, because we had a previous CARES Act committee meeting about maybe 2 weeks ago, was that those funds are not commingled. They may eventually go to nonprofits, the same nonprofits. For example, the city of Lexington's allocation may fund some of the school childcare programs that the YMCA is putting on within the city, if you will, but the YMCA may also get dollars from the county's allocation. So our dollars are not just put into one pot, and I believe our applications were reviewed separately and are being accounted for separately.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Also, for the schools, thank you for, I think, yeah, that sounds like a good plan, that their immediate needs obviously should be taken care of. There was some discussion about touchless doors, and I'm just, hoping that, any money could go their way to get to the point where they can open again, or for some in school instruction. And if those touchless doors were ever considered or brought up for some allocation, or the CARES money could possibly, is that something they're still thinking about, or did they just totally table that?
My understanding is that they are definitely still thinking about that, and that those doors can provide a good level of safety and security, and that they're still getting information about that. They're also still getting information about some potential air filtration systems for classrooms and a couple other items. But to be quite honest, I think that this $37,000 they just felt was needed to be done now.
Mm-hmm.
They continue to evaluate what else is needed. And I actually had an opportunity. I spoke with the superintendent very briefly, because I know every minute she's speaking with me, she's not working on something else. But I said to her, please don't forget to update the request for the CARES Act dollars so that we can get what you need to you as quick as possible. And so within a day, she sent an updated list of items. We requested a little bit more information, and then Mr. White, Mrs. Walters provided a little bit more information to us, and we really settled that this $37,000 is what is needed now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I attended a webinar today about navigating educational access during the pandemic from professionals from all over the United States. And I'm going to pass on the information that I gleaned from that onto the schools. But one of the things that they discussed today it's something that I probably should share with you in regard to CARES funding. And that has to do with Rapid Test Initiative. There's an initiative right now to get funding to provide COVID testing in a rapid way. There's a rapid test, I think, that you can get the results in maybe 20 minutes. And it keeps you from having to wait days and days for results. And it will lessen a child's time away from school once school comes back to open. It will lessen a parent's need to isolate or quarantine from work because they would get those results a lot faster than waiting 6 or 7 days. So that's something you might want to investigate, David and others who are on the committee, to see if that's money that we could well utilize for the entire community, actually.
Marilyn, you're spot on. We have discussed that. Jim has chased down a lot of leads and done some research on that. Jim, if you wanted to speak to that, because we have evaluated that a little bit to see if yes. So Jim.
Well, the committee was interested in knowing, because we've had similar requests from organizations and businesses to try and provide them with support and assistance so they didn't have to shut down for days while they were waiting for these tests. Now, the rapid test is very effective and accurate to determine when there is a positive case. It can tell you there's a positive case within 15 to 20 minutes. But every time a negative case comes back, in order to assure yourself that that person who tested negative is truly negative, you actually have to take the PCR test, the traditional test, which takes 5 to 6 days. So we can't shorten that period, because we can tell, we can take those positive cases out of the population, but we cannot say that everybody else is negative until we take the PCR test. There's about a 20% failure rate to detect those people who are positive and the test says they're negative. So it really does not improve the results to assure that your population is clear of COVID. The rapid test, it does not assure you that. There's a 20% chance of failure.
But at least you know right away if someone is positive.
Mhm. And the health center has that test right now. And
Yeah.
we discussed about whether we should purchase that, and it seemed like the best course of action was leave it to the health center and the hospital, because right now they're fine as far as supply. And even though they don't want you to come have a test unless you have symptoms or think you were exposed.
The testing too, the rapid testing, there will be, keeps changing. And so we at the health center, obviously we're starting implementing a new testing program for the community. But we would like to see, we have the rapid test right now. And as Jim had explained, we do it in conjunction with the PCR test. But it is a helpful tool, useful tool we use it on our employees all the time, both tests. And we also have had patients do the rapid test with the PCR. But the saliva test is another rapid test that's coming out. And hopefully that will be out soon. And I really do think that this is just something the schools really should think about. Marilyn's right that this is just part of the program of the COVID and dealing with the pandemic. There has to be some testing, I think, program in place. So I also just wanted to bring up, again, I hate to continue on about the schools, but I keep hearing the word overwhelmed, and I'm sure they're working like around the clock, a lot of hours. And I just was wondering, again, was there any discussion about money for, maybe bringing in someone like even a consultant to help them navigate through some of the issues that they're having? So, or maybe a more nurse time. I don't know. I kept hearing the word overwhelmed. So I don't know. Was there any discussion about that?
I think it's more from an educational standpoint, not from needing more supplies as far as COVID goes. I mean, we're taking care of the technology and they need that right now to get through it. But I think, we can hear from the school board meeting on Wednesday, but I think they're dealing more with the teachers kind of managing the situation more than needing supplies.
The person who spoke today was the president of the National Association of School Nurses. And she was the person who talked about the rapid testing initiative. And she said that schools are going to possibly need more nursing staff because of the need to have personnel to manage those students who've been isolated because of being symptomatic. And it's going to be on the increase because now teachers are going to be noticing any symptom and panicking and then sending those children for treatment to the office. So there would be more children coming, whereas previously if there was a sniffle or sneeze or something, they would probably stay in the classroom. Now the least little thing, teachers are going to be sending them out of the classroom for treatment by the school nurses. So that was just one of the additional things that she wanted to put on the minds of people who are working in school systems to be thinking about.
Very good.
So,
David?
no, I was just going to bring back to I think these are all important things for the schools to consider, and I suspect they are. Tonight, our goal was to move forward with, allowing our schools to access that $37,000, allow Jim and staff to move forward on the police department, essentially that entrance way, that lobby, and then also to let the Community Foundation know that they have access to the remaining dollars. So that was our goal tonight. So
I would certainly take that as a motion and ask for one of your peers perhaps to second it, and we can vote on it and move it on through.
Second.
I'm going to give the tie to Marilyn on the second and ask for any further discussion. Hearing none, roll call vote. Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Ms. Hens?
Aye.
Ziegler?
aye.
Bears?
Aye.
Smith? Ms. Strong?
Aye.
I want to give a special thank you for that unanimous vote and to David and Leslie for digging into the details of the COVID funds criteria, which is always challenging, and spending time with staff on behalf of all of council to do such incredible and effective work in our community. So thank you all, and the improvements in our school division, our police department, and the rest of our community supporting, utilizing these funds in the most efficient way is terrific. So a heartfelt thanks to David and Leslie for that support. Anything else from the CARES Committee? Keep up the good work. I think you still have a little bit of time left. And it's also worth noting it is September 3rd. How in the world did we get here? 9th month. I think all these have to be spent by December 31st-ish, or maybe in January. So keep pressing forward and doing that good work. There are a few folks that have made application for appointments, and I'm not, I haven't reached them to discuss the responsibilities. So I don't have any names to bring forward to you, but I will have several at our next meeting. And that's in essence all I have to report this evening. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. I have to say I have an overwhelmingly positive report this evening. It wasn't by design, but once in a blue moon, I guess we all deserve to experience that. So let me start out by saying, we've had a lot of virtual activities in the community recently, but I'm pleased to share that some semblance of normality may occur or will occur back in our community. First, the downtown businesses in Main Street, Lexington are holding the annual downtown Halloween event, and this year's event will be live, not virtual. However, there will be changes. The event will occur on Saturday, October 31st for the majority of the business day. Streets will not be closed, and parents and families are urged to come downtown and visit during the business day as best suits their individual schedules. And the downtown merchants and Main Street hopes that in that way we can get people spread out throughout the day downtown instead of one rush of folks in a couple-hour period. So the activities will still occur. Not all businesses can participate, but you can come downtown and celebrate Halloween on the 31st. I'm also pleased to announce that the Lexington Rockbridge JCs will be sponsoring the annual Gobble Wobble Run on Thanksgiving Day. And it will also be a live event. This fun and healthy event is organized to raise funds for the Rockbridge Area Health Center, Rockbridge Area YMCA, and the Lexington Rockbridge Chamber of Commerce. Registration begins at 8 a.m. and the race starts at 9 a.m. The race begins and ends at the Moyer River Middle School parking lot and takes runners throughout the streets of Lexington. The route right now is under consideration, and city staff, police, and fire are working with the JCs to determine what's the best route throughout the city for that day. But it's a good event, and we have two nice events coming up in the months ahead. I don't want to steal the thunder from the Lexington Police Foundation, but a very nice and needed contribution was recently made to the police department for important assets to that department. So thank you, members of the Police Foundation, and we shall all watch for details in the soon released announcement. So I'll just hold you in suspense there. The Shenandoah Valley Juvenile Center. We often do not hear about the Juvenile Center, and primarily because that's really good news for Lexington. 6 other counties and cities share in that facility here in the Shenandoah Valley. And our bed total on a regular basis is only 0.91%. So we have very few young people who have to be sent to a juvenile facility from our community, and that speaks volumes in how well we do both in our schools, in our public entities, and throughout the community of raising children who fortunately don't need those types of facilities. The jail recently received a grant from the Department of Criminal Justice Services of $47,129. And this can also be applied to COVID expenses in the jail. The grant was made to satisfy certain and specified expenses the jail is facing. And that's obviously, again, a welcome thing in our community. And I'd like to congratulate the superintendent of the jail and his staff. They did an excellent job of putting this grant together and pushing it to the finish line. I think most of you recall that we did have an ambulance accident a few months back. One of the city's ambulances was struck while responding to a call, and it was totaled. We don't want to see an accident of any sort occur, of course, but in this case, there were no injuries. And fortunately, the ambulance that was totaled was scheduled to be replaced anyway in the coming equipment replacement cycle. So we did receive an insurance settlement, and between the insurance settlement and what we have in the equipment replacement cycle, we will be bringing to you in the very near future a request to go ahead and replace that ambulance. And we're actually going to be in better shape financially than had we waited to replace it in the spring just using our equipment replacement dollars because of that settlement with the insurance company. Not a big dollar swing, but a swing in our favor nonetheless. And the fire department did a great job of making lemonade from lemons in this particular situation. As was touched on briefly in the CARES Committee, I've explored an opportunity with the health center to put in place a memorandum of understanding with the health center so that we can have a backup or an alternative means of our employees to be tested, both using the rapid test and the PCR test for COVID. We are not obligated, nor are the employees obligated to use this method of obtaining these tests, but in case they don't have a personal care physician readily available or the tests become less available or backed up in the community, this is another way we can get those tests to our employees and assure ourselves and assure them that they can take care of themselves and their family, and that our employees, who are our most important asset, can be determined to either be COVID-free or, in the worst case scenario, that they do have COVID and they're separated from the workforce, and we're all safer because of that. So I plan on putting that MOU in place. Again, there's no financial obligation for the city. It's a good deal for us. The insurance company will at this time pay any remainder of the test that's available. The city does not have to pay any remainder of that test, nor does the individual. So that may change, but for the time being, there is no cost to the city in that. Finally, another piece of good news. We were talking earlier in the work session about revenues, and thus far, with just a couple months of the fiscal year finished, our current tax collections are doing better than anticipated. The sales tax, in fact, is not only above our budget estimate, but it is actually for the first 2 months of the fiscal year above FY19 and above FY20. We did not expect that, and partially that's due to there's a little bit of a fall off that is anticipated and seen in the summer months, early summer, and this year that fall off was not as severe as we normally anticipate or see. Meal taxes have recovered somewhat, and they're below the previous year's estimates, of course, but they are also above our anticipated revenues we expect on a monthly basis for the budget. So we are meeting or exceeding at this time our meals tax forecast for the budget. Lodging taxes have recovered some, but they are still far below the FY19 and FY20 levels, and they are just near what we anticipated for the budget. So they're probably our weakest link so far in our revenue stream. The other taxes that are minor, if you will, are BPOL taxes, rescue fees, water and sewer revenues. They're not minor, but they're not general fund revenues. And our utility taxes are somewhat mixed, but they are smaller revenue streams. Rescue fees are down significantly, but for the most part, most of our revenues are either on target or slightly exceed what was our budget estimates. Very good news up until this point, but that's only for 2 months of the fiscal year. We can't count on that throughout the remainder of the 10 months. We're just going to have to keep watching and seeing what happens, whether it's COVID or other aspects of how the economy is functioning nationwide and here in our region. So again, I think very good news overall tonight, not by design, but some good news that we can celebrate. One other item I did want to bring up, and again, I think Councilmember Strawn touched on this. We are planning or have planned to have the consultant in on the 17th in a work session to discuss the Jordan's Park plan. And we also learned just last week, Jake and I were online with our Davenport consultants this week early to discuss a bond refinancing opportunity. That would be through the Virginia Resources Authority, and the council would have to pull the trigger on that October 1st. So we'd like to also brief you on that on the night of September 17th. In order to put both of those in the same work session, I'm asking if we could start at 6:30 as opposed to 7, so that we could accomplish both of those briefings. If that's not the case, we would probably want to defer, in my view, the Jordansport Park plan, so that we could present to you the opportunity that exists for this bond refinancing. There is the opportunity for us to save hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest over the course of this bond. No obligation that you need to go forward with it. There are other opportunities in the future to consider it, but in order for you to consider it fully, we'd like to put it before you and spend a few minutes discussing it with the consultant present, and then any questions you might have. So I guess my request is, could we meet on the 17th at 6:30?
Jim, let's take a look at the, I don't think anybody will have any objection, but let's take a look at the agenda and ways we might manage that may just have a 7 o'clock start, but 6:30 if necessary.
Absolutely, that's fine. Just wanted to make sure we were discussing it. You were aware. And that's my report.
Great. Yeah, the bond issue is timely and very important. Much looking at refinancing that debt, so a lower interest rate. Any questions for the city manager?
No, but I'll make a comment about that. I think the Jordan's Point will take close to an hour, so you might want to either push it back or start at 6:30. I would recommend, based on the Planning Commission presentation and discussion. The presentation was fairly short, but the discussion took a while.
Thank you, Leslie. Anyone else have anything for the city manager?
Question about Halloween. You said no street closures, and I'm curious if there have been, I guess, does that include Jackson Avenue? And two, have you had any inquiries or requests about Halloween on Jackson Avenue?
We have reached out to see what Jackson Avenue is doing. The folks there, we have not had a response yet. So what I presented this evening was just for downtown in the Main Street, Lexington and Merchants. We'll obviously consider whatever the Jackson Street neighborhood wants to do, but we have not heard from them yet.
I guess if Jackson Avenue is somehow proposed to move forward, they have to be in compliance with VDH and all the guidelines that have been put together about no more than 250 people in close proximity, and who's going to manage that. And I just want to make sure I understand how that would, I guess that would have to be in place for that to move forward.
That's correct. And that's one of the beauties, if you will, about the Main Street proposal is you don't have 400 or 500 kids downtown in an hour and a half, or 2 hours. You spread them out throughout the day, and you don't have that same consideration. But again, I've not heard anything from Jackson Avenue. Of course, staff and I will support and provide this assistance they might need if they do decide to move forward and make it a safe event and monitor it as we always do.
One concept, one idea that I heard from some families about trick-or-treating within the community was that to not rely on citizens necessarily when it comes to the idea of Jackson Avenue, whether that is the place to be and if it's attracting hundreds and hundreds of kids, but more for the city to take the lead on that and not rely on a citizen to put their name out there on behalf of many, 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 many people to apply for that street closure. Last year, we had a little situation with bad weather, trying to do what was in the best interest for folks in the name of safety. And it might just be one of those things that we may want to look at to say, does the city manager have the ability to recognize that if trick-or-treating is going to happen in the community, that hundreds of kids are going to be descending on that street, and that the city manager decide in the interest of safety and consultation with the police, here's what we're going to do, rather than waiting on one person to submit an application on behalf of their neighbors. So just something to consider that may avoid what happened last year, because it was turned out great, but it was a little touch and go there for a little while last year.
Thank you, sir. I'll check with our staff to see what occurred. Being new, I don't have that background, but I'll check it.
We'll get you briefed up on that, Jim. Don't worry. Halloween's a spooky time around here. Very good. And that's all Jim has. Any other questions for Jim? I'd like to, it's not on the agenda, but I'd like to recognize Mary Alice Russell, who's with the Rockbridge Report. I'm glad that you're with us, and we're prepared for your 30-minute presentation on the merits of the Rockbridge Report.
Wow, thank you. Yes, I will be sharing that at the next meeting when I'll be here at 6:30. So, yeah.
Terrific. Thanks.
But I'm excited to meet all of you and talk with you this fall term. So.
Very good. Well, we look forward to affirming with your professors that you were here and attentive, and good luck in your endeavors with the Rockbridge Report. And I know you can only do what you can with the material you have, but make us look good if at all possible.
Yes, I'll try my best.
Thank you. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is City Attorney. Here.
Well, keeping with Jim's theme of good news for the evening, we had a hearing today in Circuit Court on the declaratory judgment regarding the Enfield Road water tower property. I'm happy to report that Rusty Ford has withdrawn his motion to intervene, so he is no longer in the suit. And I've agreed with the other attorney on the case that we will hopefully bring things to an end on October 8th at 3 p.m. Moving forward fairly quickly and fairly cleanly, I think, based on a stipulation of facts that I'm going to need Jeff Martone to help me out with. But I don't think it's going to be sort of a full-blown trial with calling witnesses. I think it's basically going to be, we all agree what the facts are, and then we're arguing the law's application to those facts. So bottom line is good news today, and hopefully we will have an answer on that, if not on October 8th, soon thereafter, in the terms of weeks rather than months. At that point, we would just be waiting on the judge's decision on the arguments we make in court that day. So happy to answer any questions on that topic.
Members of council have any questions? Good work, and thank you for that good news, and look forward to making nice strides on the project of the water tower.
I'll ask one question. So if he's withdrawn, why does it still even have to go forward if nobody's contesting?
Well, in suits to quiet title, they're the unknown heirs of the original grantors are necessary parties. So there's this entity group of individuals that are not identified, but in theory have rights to the property. And there's a provision that allows that group of people to have an attorney appointed on their behalf who makes their arguments. It's pretty common, more usually done in partition land suits where there's, 50 potential heirs and then the heirs of those heirs. But the same idea with the quiet title suit is in theory, there is potentially someone out there who has a claim. So that's why it goes forward to the court to decide whether or not the title can be quieted.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Very good. If there are no other questions for Jared, Jared, is the only other piece your recommendation on our emergency declaration ordinance?
Yes, which we've all had before us, so I won't belabor the point. I will just ask for a motion to recertify the emergency ordinance to effectuate temporary changes in certain deadlines and to modify public meeting and public hearing practices and procedures to address continuity of operations associated with pandemic disaster.
So moved.
Thank you, Chuck. A second from Marilyn. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Ms. Strong?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously. And I would just acknowledge, have the sense from council that continuing to meet virtually is preferable for the time being. We'll certainly revisit going back into in-person meetings in the future, but for the foreseeable 30 days, 60 days, we will continue to meet virtually via Zoom.
And just on that note, Frank, at our next meeting, I will ask council to readopt this ordinance as opposed to recertifying it because we are, that will be our last meeting before the 6-month deadline. I suppose, I haven't looked to see it, maybe it's the October 1st, but regardless, before October 2nd, at one of those, certainly the first meeting, maybe the second, we will need to, I guess it is October 1st. So we could do it either the 17th or the 1st. We'll probably do it the 17th just to be safe. But we'll actually be reapproving the ordinance because by the terms of the ordinance we passed in April, it expires within 6 months. So we've been recertifying at least every 60 days. Now it's time to actually readopt, and that will give us another 6 months from that readoption.
Terrific. Thank you, Jared.
So that's something that Jared has to let all of our boards and commissions be aware of?
Yes, they probably best practice for them to all readopt their resolutions as well.
Okay.
Because that's an ordinance, do we have to have a public hearing on that? Just curious.
Yes, it will be advertised and then a public hearing.
So if it's, can we do that before the 17th meeting?
Well, that's actually, as I'm now looking at the calendar and hearing the discussion before, it sounds like that might be getting full the 17th. So it might make sense for us, but I'll work with Jim on that and see sort of how things schedule, because we could do it the 1st, since it was only passed on the 2nd of April. We've got until October 2nd to pass the readoption.
Right. Worst case scenario, if we don't adopt, we would collect in person, correct?
Correct.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you, Jared. Anything else?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for the attorney.
Yes, sir.
Jared, do the boards and commissions also have to adopt in that 6 month or readopt in that 6 month period, or can they do that anytime thereafter council's adopted?
I'll need to look at how those resolutions are actually phrased, but I think they'll be able to readopt at their next meeting.
Thank you.
Very good. Anything else for the city attorney? Everybody's all set. Next item is new business, the renaming of the Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery Perpetual Trust Fund and naming of representatives of the Oak Grove Cemetery Perpetual Care Trust. Jim, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council Member. This is sort of an administrative detail. We all know that the former Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery is now the Oak Grove Cemetery. So we do have a perpetual trust fund that's named Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery Perpetual Trust Fund. We are recommending through a resolution prepared by the city attorney that that trust fund be renamed Oak Grove Cemetery Perpetual Care Trust Fund. And also we have to have 2 representatives appointed to that entity. In the past, it's been the finance director and city manager, and the previous finance director and city manager are still named, and we probably would do better to have the current city manager and finance director named to that body. So my recommendation is that we approve this resolution. And if you have any questions, the city attorney and I can certainly answer those for you.
Very good. Thank you, Jim. Members of council have any questions regarding? Hearing none, I would ask for your consideration.
I move to approve the resolution renaming the Stonewall Jackson Memorial Cemetery Perpetual Trust Fund and naming of representatives of the Oak Grove Cemetery Perpetual Care Trust Fund.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote. Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Very good. Any other business to come before? Any comments before we head towards adjournment? Marilyn? No. Well, hearing none, I would just remind us all that we have much to be grateful for, and encourage everyone to remain positive and respectful and kind as we continue to navigate COVID world that we're living in, and as we approach elections coming up in the coming months. And hope you all have a great night, and thank you again for all that you do for our community. Good night. We are adjourned.